Hey guys, tonight we're steering far away from polished swords and graceful duels beneath cherry blossoms. Forget the romantic image of noble samurai standing tall on a battlefield. This is the slow, uncomfortable, often miserable reality of life as a samurai foot soldier. Think less honor, more hunger, less poetry, more blisters. These were the guys at the bottom of the samurai food chain, stuck with endless drills, bad food, stiff armor, and the constant threat of punishment for mistakes as small as stepping out of line. The days were long, the nights cold or humid, depending on the season. And as for glory, that was reserved for the men on horseback, not the ones marching through mud. But before we wade into all that, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these sleepy history deep dives. Drop a comment too. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Always fun seeing night owls, early risers, and insomniacs from around the world tuning in. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe let a fan hum quietly nearby, and let's slowly step back into feudal Japan and the life of a samurai foot soldier. Imagine waking before dawn in a drafty wooden barracks somewhere in feudal Japan. The air is cold and damp, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the lingering smoke from cooking fires that died hours ago. Your sleeping mat smells faintly of old straw and sweat, and your joints ache before you even sit up. The wooden floor beneath you is hard and unforgiving, worn smooth by countless feet, but offering no comfort to your tired bones. Around you, other low-ranking samurai foot soldiers stir awake as well. Some shift under thin blankets that provide little warmth against the morning chill. Others cough softly to clear the dampness from their throats. There is no fire burning this early, only the faintest gray light creeping in through slatted shutters and the muffled sound of distant voices beginning to stir outside. The barracks themselves tell the story of your station. Unlike the comfortable quarters of higher-ranking samurai, these buildings are functional at best. The walls are thin, letting in every draft and failing to keep out the sounds of the night. Rats scurry between the beams overhead, and you have learned to sleep despite their constant scratching. The roof leaks in 3 places when it rains, creating muddy puddles that freeze solid during winter months. You share this space with dozens of other men, packed together like goods in a storehouse, each allocated barely enough room to lie down with your meager possessions. Your possessions amount to little more than the clothes on your back and the weapons you are required to maintain. A wooden chest at the foot of your sleeping area holds everything you own in this world. A spare undergarment, a small pouch containing a few copper coins if you are fortunate, perhaps a letter from family written on cheap paper that you read until the ink begins to fade. Some men keep small carved figures or painted stones, tiny reminders of home or loved ones they left behind. These treasures, humble as they are, represent the only privacy and personal expression allowed in your regimented existence. Before anything else, before food or warmth, your first duty is to tend to your armor and weapons. This ritual begins each day without exception. A routine so deeply ingrained that your hands move through the motions even when your mind still thick with sleep. Your armor is a patchwork of necessity rather than pride. Leather straps have been repaired more times than you can count, their original color long since faded to a uniform brown-gray. Metal plates bear the scratches and dents of previous battles, their edges dulled by years of wear and constant maintenance. The lacquer that once made the armor gleam proudly now flakes off in places, revealing the bare metal beneath like wounds that refuse to heal. There is no question of skipping this task, no matter how tired you feel or how much your body protests the early hour. Even the smallest sign of rust, a loose fastening, or a neglected strap will not go unnoticed by the sharp eyes of your superiors. They move through the barracks each morning, like hawks scanning for prey, their gaze missing nothing. Punishment for such carelessness can range from harsh words delivered at volume for all to hear, to public humiliation that follows you for weeks, or worse punishments that leave lasting marks on both body and spirit. You wipe the grime from your chest plate with a rag that has seen better days, working methodically across each surface. The metal is cold under your fingers, and condensation from the night air has left a thin film that must be carefully removed. You check your helmet's cords, testing each knot and examining the leather for signs of wear. The helmet itself is heavy and uncomfortable, its interior padding long since compressed into hard lumps that dig into your skull during long hours of wear. Your sword requires the most careful attention. This blade was passed down from another soldier who likely died in battle or perhaps from illness on the roadside during some forgotten campaign. Its history is written in the small nicks along the edge, the slight discoloration near the hilt, where countless hands have gripped it in moments of fear and determination. You test its edge carefully, knowing that your life may depend on its sharpness. The weight of it in your hands is familiar now, after months or years of daily handling, but it never becomes truly comfortable. It is a tool of violence, and that reality never fully leaves your mind. The maintenance of weapons extends beyond the sword. Your spear, longer than you are tall, must be inspected for cracks in the wooden shaft and chips in the metal point. The binding that holds the point to the shaft requires constant attention, as a failure here could mean death in battle. Your bow, if you are fortunate enough to possess one, needs its string checked and replaced regularly. Arrows must be counted and their fletching examined for damage. Each piece of equipment represents not just a tool, but a lifeline, and treating any of them carelessly is a luxury you cannot afford. Training begins soon after this morning ritual. There is no leisurely breakfast and no slow start to the day. The transition from maintenance to training is abrupt and unforgiving. You and your fellow foot soldiers file out of the barracks and line up in the training yard, a patch of ground worn bare by countless feet and stained dark with the sweat and sometimes blood of previous sessions. Standing rigidly under the watchful eye of your instructor, you wait for the day's ordeal to begin. The instructors are men who have survived what you are enduring now, but their survival has not made them sympathetic to your struggles. They understand that weakness kills, and they drive that lesson home with relentless brutality. Their voices carry across the training ground like the crack of whips, sharp and commanding. They watch every movement, every stance, every swing of a weapon with eyes that miss nothing. To them, you are raw material to be shaped through pain and repetition into something that might survive a battle. The morning routine is always the same, a grinding repetition that wears down both body and spirit. Sword forms come first, the same movements practiced thousands of times until they become as automatic as breathing. Draw, cut, block, thrust, sheathe. The motions flow into one another in patterns that were ancient when your grandfather's grandfather was young. Your muscles remember the forms, even when your mind wanders, but wandering brings swift correction. The instructors seem to possess an uncanny ability to detect when your attention wavers, even for a moment. Thrust and block drills follow, paired exercises where you face another soldier and practice the deadly dance of combat. The wooden practice swords strike with enough force to leave bruises, and the impacts reverberate through your arms and shoulders. The sound of wood striking wood fills the training yard, a percussion that speaks of violence barely contained. Mistakes in timing or positioning are immediately apparent and immediately punished, either by the instructor's harsh words or by the painful reminder of your partner's successful strike. Spear techniques leave your hands blistered and raw. The long weapons are unwieldy at first, requiring strength and coordination to wield effectively. Hour after hour, you practice thrusts and parries, learning to use the weapon's length to your advantage while guarding against an opponent who seeks to close the distance. The wooden shaft rubs against your palms until the skin tears and bleeds, but there is no cause for such minor injuries. You wrap your hands in strips of cloth and continue, knowing that real battles will offer no consideration for such small pains. Even when your shoulders shake and your legs tremble from fatigue, stopping is not an option. The human body has limits, but in this place, those limits are treated as suggestions to be overcome rather than boundaries to be respected. When you think you cannot lift your arms for another sword form, you discover that somehow you can. When your legs feel ready to collapse beneath you, you find the strength to remain standing. This is not encouragement or inspiration, but simple survival. Those who cannot push beyond their perceived limits do not last long in this life. Mistakes earn immediate correction that goes far beyond simple instruction. A barbed insult delivered with enough venom to strip away whatever pride you might have retained. A sharp slap across the face that leaves your cheek burning and your ears ringing. Or extra laps around the perimeter of the training ground until your lungs burn and your vision blurs from oxygen debt. The corrections are designed not just to teach proper technique, but to break down your sense of self and rebuild it in the shape that your superiors require. The physical punishment extends beyond the immediate correction. Those who struggle with the day's lessons often find themselves assigned additional training that continues long after the others have been dismissed. While your fellows rest their aching bodies, you repeat the same movements that gave you trouble, over and over, until muscle memory finally overcomes whatever weakness led to your failure. These extra sessions take place under the critical eye of an instructor who shows no mercy for fatigue or frustration. Only after hours of this grinding repetition are you granted a meal, and even this basic necessity comes with conditions and restrictions. The food is barely enough to sustain a man engaged in such strenuous activity. A thin bowl of rice forms the foundation of the meal, the grains often old, and sometimes containing small stones or bits of chaff that must be carefully removed. The rice is cooked in large quantities in massive pots, and by the time it reaches your bowl, it has often cooled to an unappetizing temperature. Sometimes the rice is accompanied by pickled vegetables if supplies have been good, and if those in charge of provisioning have been generous with the lower ranks. These vegetables, preserved in salt and vinegar, provide a sharp contrast to the bland rice and offer some small nutritional variety to your diet. But such additions are irregular and cannot be counted upon. More often, the rice stands alone, a simple fuel for your body rather than anything approaching a satisfying meal. You eat quickly and silently, hunched over your bowl like an animal protecting its food. Conversation during meals is discouraged and sometimes forbidden entirely. The silence serves multiple purposes. It maintains discipline, prevents the formation of bonds that might interfere with obedience, and ensures that the meal is consumed efficiently without wasting time that could be devoted to training or labor. The wooden chopsticks click against the ceramic bowl, and the sound of dozens of men eating in silence creates an atmosphere of barely contained desperation. The speed of eating is not entirely by choice. You know that more drills or labor await once the meal is finished, and prolonging the eating does not delay the return to duty. Additionally, there is always the fear that your meal might be taken away if you are perceived as taking too long or showing insufficient gratitude for what you have been given. Hunger lingers like a dull ache in your stomach, even after you have finished every grain of rice, but it is something you have grown used to. The life of a samurai foot soldier does not leave much room for satisfaction, especially when it comes to food. The constant hunger affects more than just physical comfort. It weakens your ability to concentrate during training, makes injuries slower to heal, and contributes to the overall sense of misery that pervades daily life. Your body burns through the meager calories quickly during the intense physical activity, leaving you in a perpetual state of mild starvation. Sleep becomes restless as your empty stomach protests, and even your dreams are sometimes filled with images of food you cannot have. Discipline extends far beyond the training ground and meal times. Every aspect of your existence is governed by rules, some written and many more understood through painful experience. How you stand, how you bow, how you address superiors, even how you hold your weapons while walking from one place to another. The rules form an invisible web that constrains every movement and every word, a complex system designed to ensure absolute obedience and conformity. Your posture must remain correct at all times when in the presence of superiors, which is nearly all the time. Shoulders back, spine straight, eyes forward or respectfully downcast as the situation demands. Slouching or relaxing your stance is seen as a sign of disrespect and laziness, qualities that are not tolerated in any measure. Even when standing for hours during inspections or ceremonies, you must maintain the same rigid posture, ignoring the pain that shoots through your back and the numbness that creeps into your legs. The way you bow carries meaning that goes far beyond simple politeness. The depth of the bow, the length of time you hold the position, the angle of your head, all of these details communicate your understanding of hierarchy and your place within it. A bow that is too shallow shows insufficient respect, while one that is too deep might be seen as mocking or excessive. Learning the precise requirements for each situation takes time and observation, and mistakes are not treated lightly. Addressing superiors requires not only the correct words, but the correct tone, volume, and timing. You must wait to be acknowledged before speaking, and even then, your words must be chosen carefully. Casual conversation is impossible. Every exchange is formal and purposeful. The language itself becomes a tool of oppression, with different forms of speech required for different ranks and situations. A single misstep in language can bring swift consequences that serve as lessons not just for you, but for everyone within earshot. A misplaced word earns a sharp reprimand, delivered with enough force to make clear that such errors will not be repeated. The reprimand often takes place in front of others, adding the sting of public humiliation to the immediate punishment. Poor posture during formation means additional duties that last well into the night, physical labor, or extra training sessions that push your already exhausted body beyond its limits. The punishment serves multiple purposes: correcting the immediate infraction, deterring others from similar mistakes, and reinforcing the absolute nature of the hierarchy. The hierarchy itself is rigid and unforgiving, a structure that determines every aspect of your life with mathematical precision. Even though you carry the title of samurai, a designation that once carried great honor and respect, you often feel closer to a laborer than a noble warrior. The title means little when your daily existence consists of backbreaking work, minimal food, and constant subordination to those above you in a carefully maintained chain of command. The social structure makes your place painfully clear through both obvious and subtle means. Above you are the Hatamoto, the elite bannermen personally loyal to the daimyo. These men represent everything you will never be. They have real armor, not the cobbled-together protection you wear, but gleaming suits of lacquered plates that proclaim their status to anyone who sees them. Their armor fits properly, having been made specifically for them, rather than inherited from the dead or discarded by others. The food provided to the Hatamoto is not only more abundant, but of better quality. Where you receive thin rice and occasional vegetables, they enjoy meat, fish, and delicacies that you can barely imagine. Their meals are served at regular times, rather than being dependent on the completion of training or labor. They eat with proper utensils from fine dishes, maintaining their dignity even in the simple act of nourishment. Perhaps most importantly, the Hatamoto have the possibility of glory in battle. Their position in combat formations places them where heroic actions are possible and likely to be witnessed by those who matter. They lead charges, engage in single combat with enemy officers, and perform the kinds of deeds that are remembered in songs and stories. When victory comes, they receive recognition, rewards, and advancement opportunities that validate their sacrifices and struggles. Above the Hatamoto are the daimyo themselves, the powerful feudal lords who make decisions that ripple through your life without them ever knowing your name or caring about your existence. These men live in a world so far removed from yours that they might as well be inhabitants of another realm entirely. Their concerns involve politics, land management, and strategic planning on scales that dwarf your daily struggles. When they think of soldiers at all, it is in terms of numbers and capabilities, rather than individual human beings with hopes and fears. The daimyo's decisions affect everything about your life. Where you will be stationed, what campaigns you will join, how much food will be allocated to your unit, what equipment you will receive. All of these crucial details are determined by men who will never see your face or know your story. You are a resource to be deployed, maintained, and if necessary, expended in pursuit of their larger goals. The impersonal nature of this relationship adds another layer of dehumanization to your already difficult existence. Your own chance for advancement feels impossibly remote, a dream so unlikely that entertaining it seems like a form of madness. No matter how hard you train, how obediently you follow orders, or how many battles you survive, social mobility is something that happens to others, not to you. The system is designed to maintain stability, and that stability depends on keeping people in their assigned places. Exceptional performance might earn you slightly better treatment or marginally less dangerous assignments, but true advancement beyond your current station remains virtually impossible. The few stories of common soldiers rising to higher positions serve more to reinforce the system than to offer genuine hope. These tales are told and retold precisely because they are so rare, and they typically involve circumstances so extraordinary that they cannot be replicated through ordinary effort. When such advancement does occur, it often requires not just exceptional skill and bravery, but also political connections, favorable timing, and considerable luck. For every story of a successful rise in station, there are thousands of soldiers who performed equally well, but received no recognition or advancement. This hopelessness regarding advancement affects every aspect of your daily life. Without the prospect of improvement, each day becomes simply another iteration of the same grinding routine. Training becomes not preparation for a better future, but merely the price of continued survival. Excellence becomes not a path to betterment, but simply a way to avoid punishment. The psychological weight of this reality crushes the spirit as surely as the physical demands exhaust the body. When word comes that your unit will be deployed for a march or a campaign, there is no thrill of coming glory, no excitement at the prospect of testing your skills in actual combat. Only dread settles in your stomach like a cold stone. You have seen the aftermath of such movements, either through your own experience or through the testimony of those who returned. Soldiers coming back with hollow eyes that have seen too much, their spirits broken by experiences they cannot fully communicate to those who are not there. Bodies broken by the road more than the battlefield. Men aged beyond their years by the accumulated trauma of campaign life. The preparation for deployment brings its own miseries. Equipment that was barely adequate for training must now serve in actual combat conditions. Armor that felt heavy during practice becomes an unbearable burden when worn for days on end. Weapons that seemed functional in the training yard reveal new flaws under the stress of real use. Food that was insufficient during regular duty becomes critically inadequate when combined with the demands of marching and fighting. The marches themselves are long and brutal, exercises in endurance that push the human body to its limits and beyond. Your straw sandals, already worn from daily use, wear out quickly on rough roads and rocky terrain, leaving your feet blistered and raw. The weight of your armor and provisions digs into your shoulders, creating pressure points that become agonizing over the course of days. Each step becomes an effort of will as much as a physical action. The roads you travel are often in poor condition, rutted and muddy or dusty, depending on the weather. During rain, they become rivers of mud that suck at your feet and make every step treacherous. In dry conditions, clouds of dust kicked up by hundreds of marching feet fill your lungs and coat everything you carry. The pace of the march is determined not by your comfort, but by military necessity, and it rarely allows for adequate rest or recovery. Nights spent sleeping outdoors bring their own torments. With only your worn cloak for warmth, you lie on hard ground that seems to find every sensitive spot on your body. The cold seeps through the thin fabric and into your bones, making sleep fitful and unrestful. Guard duties are assigned in rotation, meaning that even the brief rest you do get is often interrupted by hours of standing watch in the darkness, straining your eyes and ears for signs of enemy activity. The food situation during march deteriorates from barely adequate to genuinely insufficient. Supply lines become stretched, and lower-ranking soldiers are the first to feel the impact of reduced rations. The rice becomes even thinner, and vegetables disappear entirely from many meals. Foraging is sometimes permitted, but the areas around military routes are quickly stripped of anything edible by the passage of armies. Hunger becomes a constant companion, sapping your strength and clouding your judgment at times when both are most needed. If a battle does come, the reality bears no resemblance to the carefully orchestrated duels depicted in songs or painted on screens in noble houses. The battlefield is a place of chaos that assaults all the senses simultaneously. Dust kicked up by thousands of feet creates a haze that limits visibility to mere yards. The smell of sweat, blood, and fear mingles with the smoke from burning equipment or buildings. The noise is overwhelming. Weapons clashing against armor and shields, men shouting orders or crying out in pain, horses screaming when they are wounded. Commands shouted from officers barely carry over the cacophony of battle, and even when you can hear them, the confusion of combat makes it difficult to understand or respond appropriately. The careful formations practiced endlessly during training dissolve into a confused melee where individual survival often takes precedence over tactical considerations. You find yourself fighting not as part of a coordinated unit, but as an individual desperately trying to stay alive in a situation that seems designed to prevent that outcome. You charge forward with your unit, not out of courage or bloodlust, but because to hesitate is to draw punishment or suspicion of cowardice. The momentum of battle carries you along whether you want to go or not. Around you, men you have trained with and shared meals with fall to enemy weapons or are trampled by their own comrades in the confusion. The randomness of death in battle is perhaps its most terrifying aspect. Skill and preparation matter, but luck often matters more. The physical reality of combat is nothing like the clean, honorable encounters depicted in stories. It is messy, exhausting, and brutally efficient. Wounds are inflicted and received without ceremony or meaning beyond the immediate tactical situation. The sword work you practiced for hours becomes desperate hacking and slashing as you try to survive each moment long enough to reach the next. Your carefully maintained weapons become tools of survival rather than symbols of honor. Whether you live or die feels almost entirely up to chance, a roll of dice in a game where the stakes are absolute. The man next to you might be struck down by an arrow fired from so far away that he never saw his killer, while you escape injury through pure luck. Superior skill can improve your odds, but it cannot guarantee survival in the chaos of battle. This randomness makes every engagement a form of gambling with your life as the stake. And if you survive the day, there is no feast waiting, no celebration of your valor or endurance. No medals are distributed to recognize your service, and no songs are sung in your honor by grateful civilians who will never know what you endured on their behalf. You are lucky if you get an extra ration of rice as a reward, and even that small recognition might be accompanied by additional duties assigned as some form of backhanded acknowledgement of your survival. Injuries sustained in battle often go untreated beyond the most basic field medicine. Minor wounds are expected to heal on their own, while more serious injuries receive attention only if they completely incapacitate you. Infection is common, spreading through cuts and punctures that were not properly cleaned in the aftermath of combat. The lack of medical knowledge and supplies means that wounds that should be minor can become life-threatening, while injuries that appear serious might heal surprisingly well if fortune favors you. You might spend weeks limping on a damaged leg that never received proper treatment. The pain, a constant reminder of battles past. Coughing fits that keep you awake through sleepless nights might persist for months after inhaling smoke or dust during combat. But unless you collapse completely and become unable to perform your duties, you are expected to report for training the next morning as usual, acting as if your injuries do not exist. The psychological wounds often prove more lasting than the physical ones. Images from battle replay themselves in your mind at unexpected moments, bringing back the fear and confusion with startling clarity. The faces of men you killed haunt your dreams, even though you knew nothing about them beyond the fact that they were trying to kill you. Sleep becomes elusive, not just because of physical discomfort, but because closing your eyes brings back memories you would rather forget. At night, as you lie staring at the ceiling beams of the barracks, or up at the stars if you are out on campaign, there is often time for quiet reflection that brings its own form of suffering. The silence and darkness create space for thoughts that the busy routine of daily life normally keeps at bay. You may think back to your childhood, to a time when the world seemed full of possibilities, and your future appeared bright with promise. How you once imagined being a samurai would mean honor, respect, and perhaps even poetry written in your name someday. These childhood dreams now seem like the fantasies of someone else, a different person who could not have imagined the reality you now endure. The gap between expectation and reality is so vast that it seems like a cruel joke played by fate or the gods. Instead of honor, you have found only endless subordination. Instead of respect, you have discovered that your title means nothing when separated from the power and position that give it meaning. Instead, you find yourself trapped in an endless cycle of physical exhaustion and emotional numbness, each day blending into the next in a routine that serves no higher purpose than mere survival. The numbness is perhaps a mercy, a protection against feelings that would be too painful to bear if experienced fully. But it also represents a kind of death, the slow erosion of everything that once made you feel human and hopeful. The idea of honor still exists, somewhere far above you, like a distant star barely visible through the haze of your daily life. You can remember what it felt like to believe in honor as a real and achievable goal, but that belief now seems as remote as childhood itself. Honor has become something that happens to other people, in other circumstances, under conditions that will never apply to your situation. It remains as an abstract concept that provides no comfort and offers no guidance for the choices you face each day. Yet despite all this suffering, all this grinding routine that wears away at your spirit like water-eroding stone, you rise again the next morning. The decision to continue is not really a decision at all, but simply the absence of any viable alternative. Because what else is there? Desertion means death if you are caught, and even if you escape, where would you go? What life could you build with no skills other than those of warfare, no connections beyond your fellow soldiers, and no resources beyond the basic equipment you carry? This is your duty, the role assigned to you by birth and circumstance, and the social order that governs everything in your world. The concept of duty has been drilled into you so thoroughly that it operates beyond conscious thought, compelling obedience even when obedience brings only suffering. Duty becomes not a choice, but a fundamental characteristic, as natural and unavoidable as breathing. The cycle continues with the inevitability of the seasons. Training, discipline, obedience, survival. Each element reinforces the others in a pattern that seems designed to perpetuate itself indefinitely. Training prepares you for battles that test your obedience, which requires discipline that helps you survive long enough to return to training. This is the rhythm of your life, as regular and as inescapable as your own heartbeat. And yet, even within this seemingly endless cycle of hardship and submission, there are moments that hint at something beyond mere survival. A shared glance with a fellow soldier who understands your struggles without words. A sunset viewed from the walls of a fortress that reminds you that beauty still exists in the world. A letter from home that arrives against all odds and reminds you that somewhere, someone still remembers your name and wishes for your return. These moments do not change the fundamental nature of your existence, but they provide small anchors of humanity in a sea of dehumanizing routine. They remind you that beneath the armor and the discipline and the endless obedience, something of your original self still survives, battered and nearly extinguished, but not completely destroyed. In these brief interludes, you remember that you are more than just a tool of war, more than just another body in formation. But such moments pass quickly, overwhelmed by the demands of daily survival and the pressure to conform to expectations that leave no room for individual expression or personal desires. The system that governs your life is too large and too well established to be changed by individual resistance or even individual excellence. It continues to operate according to its own logic, grinding through lives and dreams with the impersonal efficiency of a millstone. For some samurai, even death did not bring an end to their duty. The obligations that bound them in life sometimes extended beyond the grave, creating legends that would outlive the men who created them by centuries. Stories of loyalty so absolute that it transcended mortality itself, of honor so pure that it could not be extinguished by something as mundane as death. As we leave behind the muddy training grounds and drafty barracks, as we step away from the daily grind of existence as a foot soldier, another story begins to take shape in the darkness of a winter night. A story that would transform the meaning of duty and loyalty, turning abstract concepts into actions so dramatic that they would echo through history. The suffering of common soldiers would soon give way to a tale of extraordinary devotion, played out on a stage where the stakes were not just individual survival, but the very meaning of honor itself. It is a snowy night in Edo, the great city that serves as the seat of power for the Tokugawa shogunate. Through the quiet streets, moving with the silence that comes from absolute purpose, 47 masterless samurai make their way toward a mission that would become one of the most famous acts of revenge in Japanese history. These men, known to history as the 47 Ronin, carried with them a burden of obligation that had consumed their lives for nearly 2 years. A duty so profound that it could only be fulfilled through the ultimate sacrifice. Now let us leave behind the muddy training grounds and turn our attention to the quiet, snow-covered streets of Edo. It is the winter of 1702. The air is cold and still. Snow gathers on the rooftops, softening the sharp edges of the city. Lanterns flicker behind paper screens, casting pale light that reflects off the drifts of white along narrow alleyways. The streets are nearly empty. The muffled crunch of footsteps in the snow can be heard only if you listen carefully. The city itself breathes differently in winter. During the warmer months, Edo pulses with activity from dawn to dusk. Merchants shout from their stalls, children dart between the legs of adults, and the constant clatter of wooden wheels on stone creates an endless rhythm. But winter transforms everything. The cold drives people indoors earlier. Conversations become whispered exchanges. Even the dogs that usually roam freely seem to understand the need for quiet, padding softly through the snow with their heads low and ears alert. In this season, the social divisions that normally structure Japanese society become more pronounced. The wealthy retreat deeper into their heated homes, their braziers glowing warm through translucent windows. The poor huddle together in whatever shelter they can find, sharing body heat and meager supplies of charcoal. The samurai class, caught between these extremes, maintain their dignity even as many face financial hardship. Their breath forms clouds in the cold air as they walk with measured steps, their katana and wakizashi still proudly displayed despite empty purses. It is against this backdrop that we must understand the story of the 47 Ronin. Somewhere in this hushed landscape, a group of men is preparing for something they have planned for months. These are the 47 Ronin, former samurai who had once served a lord named Asano Naganori. Their story is one that has been told and retold across generations, often wrapped in the language of loyalty and sacrifice. But like all famous tales, the truth beneath the legend is layered and complex. The Japan of 1702 was a nation in transition. The Tokugawa shogunate had been in power for nearly a century, bringing an unprecedented period of peace after generations of civil war. This peace, however, came with rigid social controls. The samurai class, once defined by their role as warriors, found themselves increasingly ceremonial figures in a world where administrative skill mattered more than sword work. Many struggled with their identity in this new order. They were expected to maintain the appearance of martial readiness while serving primarily as bureaucrats and courtiers. This tension between old warrior traditions and new peaceful realities created a peculiar kind of anxiety among the samurai. They were caught between worlds, no longer needed as fighters, but not yet fully accepted as civilian administrators. Their code of honor, Bushido, had been developed during centuries of warfare, but now it had to be applied to situations involving paperwork, court ceremonies, and diplomatic protocol. The contradictions inherent in this transformation would play a crucial role in the events that unfolded. To understand their mission that night, we need to step back and recall the events that brought them here. Asano Naganori, a young daimyo from the Ako domain, was summoned to Edo by the shogunate. His domain was relatively small and remote, located in what is now Hyogo Prefecture. Ako was known for its salt production, a valuable commodity that provided steady income, but hardly made Asano one of the more influential lords in Japan. His youth and relative inexperience in court politics would prove to be significant factors in what followed. The summons to Edo was both an honor and a burden. It meant recognition by the shogunate, but it also meant enormous expense. Traveling to Edo required a large retinue, elaborate clothing, and generous gifts for various officials. For a minor lord like Asano, this could strain his domain's finances for years. Nevertheless, refusing was not an option. The Tokugawa system of Sankin Katai, alternate attendance, required daimyo to spend time in Edo under the shogun's direct supervision. This served the dual purpose of keeping potential rebels close and bankrupting them through forced expenditure. His task was ceremonial, assisting with the formal reception of envoys from the imperial court. It was an important role, but also one steeped in ritual and courtly etiquette. The relationship between the shogunate and the imperial court in Kyoto was delicate and complex. Officially, the emperor remained the supreme authority in Japan, but in practice, the shogun held all real power. Ceremonies involving imperial envoys required careful choreography to maintain the fiction of imperial supremacy while demonstrating shogunal control. These ceremonies had evolved into elaborate theatrical performances where every gesture, every word, every gift had symbolic meaning. The slightest mistake could be interpreted as either disrespect to the emperor or challenge to the shogun, depending on the political climate. For someone unfamiliar with these nuances, the entire process was a minefield of potential embarrassment or worse. For guidance in these matters, Asano was placed under the supervision of a senior official named Kira Yoshinaka. Kira was a master of protocol, a man who had spent decades learning the intricate dance of court ceremony. He held the title of Koke, or Master of Ceremonies, a position that placed him among the shogun's most trusted advisors on matters of protocol and etiquette. His knowledge was encyclopedic, covering everything from the proper way to fold a letter to the correct sequence of bows during formal presentations. Historical records suggest that Kira was known for being difficult. Some accounts describe him as arrogant and demanding, while others say he simply expected proper gifts and deference in line with court customs of the time. The truth likely lies somewhere between these characterizations. Kira lived in a world where reputation was everything, where a single misstep could end a career built over decades. His demanding nature may have been less personal arrogance than professional necessity. In his position, accepting anything less than perfection from those under his guidance could reflect poorly on his own competence. The system of gift-giving in Tokugawa, Japan, was elaborate and essential. These were not bribes in the modern sense, but rather formal expressions of respect and gratitude that maintained the social fabric. The gifts had to be appropriate to the status of both giver and receiver, presented at the correct time, and accompanied by precisely worded expressions of humility. For a master of ceremonies like Kira, receiving inadequate gifts was not just personally insulting, but professionally damaging. Asano, whether through pride, misunderstanding, or frustration, did not meet those expectations. Perhaps he genuinely did not understand the financial obligations involved in working with Kira. Perhaps his domain's limited resources made it impossible to provide gifts of the expected quality. Or perhaps his samurai pride rebelled against what he saw as unseemly demands for payment. The exact reasons remain unclear, but the result was a growing tension between the two men. In many ways, Asano and Kira represented two different generations of samurai adaptation to the Tokugawa piece. Kira had successfully transformed himself into a master of the new order, where ceremony and protocol mattered more than martial prowess. He had learned to navigate the complex web of obligations and expectations that kept the peace, but also constrained individual freedom. Asano, younger and from a more remote domain, may have still carried idealized notions of samurai honor that were increasingly out of place in Edo's sophisticated political environment. The cultural gulf between them extended beyond mere generational differences. Kira was from the heart of the Tokugawa system, intimately familiar with its unwritten rules and subtle hierarchies. Asano came from the periphery, where life was simpler but also more isolated from the currents of change flowing through Japanese society. When these two worldviews collided, the result was almost inevitable. Tensions rose between the two men. What began as subtle slights and cold exchanges eventually escalated. Court life in Edo was renowned for its refinement, but beneath the polished surface lay fierce competition for status and favor. Every interaction was observed and analyzed. Every slight, real or imagined, became fodder for gossip and speculation. In this environment, the deteriorating relationship between Asano and Kira did not go unnoticed. Other officials watched the situation develop with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Some may have sympathized with Asano's position, understanding the financial pressures he faced. Others likely saw his difficulties as confirmation of his unsuitability for court life. A few may have actively encouraged the conflict, seeing opportunity in the potential downfall of either man. The court was full of such calculated observers, people who advanced their own interests by carefully monitoring the rise and fall of others. The specific incidents that led to the final confrontation have been lost to history, transformed by generations of storytellers into dramatic scenes that may bear little resemblance to the actual events. What we know is that the relationship deteriorated over a period of weeks, with each man becoming increasingly frustrated with the other. Asano felt humiliated and manipulated. Kira felt disrespected and professionally undermined. Both were probably correct in their assessments. One day, within the walls of Edo Castle, Asano reached his breaking point. In a sudden and irreversible decision, he drew his sword and attacked Kira. The moment represents everything that was wrong with the collision between old samurai values and new political realities. For centuries, samurai had been taught that their sword was their soul, that personal honor was worth more than life itself. When faced with what he perceived as intolerable insult, Asano responded as his ancestors would have responded on a battlefield. But this was not a battlefield. This was the Shogun's palace, the most carefully controlled space in all of Japan. Here, violence was not just illegal, but unthinkable. The entire Tokugawa system depended on the Shogun's ability to maintain perfect order within his own domain. Any breach of that peace, no matter how small, threatened the fundamental assumptions on which the regime rested. The attack was poorly executed. Kira survived with only minor injuries, probably a slash across the face that left him scarred but alive. In later retellings, this detail would be transformed into evidence of divine intervention, or Asano's reluctance to commit murder. More likely, it simply reflects the reality that drawing a sword and attacking someone in a crowded palace corridor is difficult to do effectively. Asano may have been overcome by emotion, or he may have hesitated at the last moment, unable to fully commit to an act that would certainly mean his death. But the consequences for Asano were swift and severe. Drawing a weapon within the shogun's palace was a crime of the highest order, an act that challenged the very foundation of Tokugawa authority. The response had to be immediate and decisive, both to punish the perpetrator and to demonstrate to others that such behavior would never be tolerated. Asano was arrested on the spot, his weapons confiscated, his movements restricted. The speed of the official response reveals how seriously the authorities took this breach of protocol. Within hours, investigators were questioning witnesses, examining the scene, and preparing their report for the shogun's senior advisors. The case was clear-cut from a legal standpoint. Asano had committed an act of violence within the palace walls. The prescribed punishment was death, and there was no room for appeal or mitigation. That same day, he was ordered to commit seppuku, a ritual suicide expected of samurai who brought shame upon themselves. The decision to allow him this honorable death, rather than execution as a common criminal, was itself a form of mercy, recognition that despite his crime, Asano remained a member of the samurai class. Seppuku allowed him to die with dignity, demonstrating his acceptance of responsibility for his actions. The ritual took place in the garden of a mansion belonging to a Tokugawa retainer, with official witnesses present to ensure it was performed correctly. Asano would have been dressed in white, the color of death and purification. He would have been given time to compose a final poem, as was traditional. The actual act of cutting open his belly would have been brief, followed immediately by decapitation by an assistant to end his suffering quickly. His lands were confiscated. His retainers were left masterless, their incomes gone, their positions dissolved. The punishment extended far beyond Asano himself to encompass his entire domain. The Ako domain, built up over generations by his family, was dissolved overnight. Its revenues were redirected to the shogunate. Its administrative structure was dismantled. The people who had lived under Asano's rule suddenly found themselves subject to new masters, with no connection to their local traditions or concerns. In feudal Japan, a samurai without a master became a Ronin, a status filled with shame and social uncertainty. The word itself meant wave person, suggesting someone tossed about by circumstances beyond their control. For many of Asano's former retainers, this meant drifting into other lines of work. Some became merchants, abandoning their samurai status entirely to engage in trade. Others found positions as guards or instructors, using their martial skills in more humble circumstances. Some simply disappeared into the streets of Edo, blending in with the city's growing population of displaced people seeking new opportunities. The psychological impact of this sudden change cannot be overstated. These men had defined themselves through their service to the Asano family. Their entire identity was built around concepts of loyalty, duty, and honor that suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of political reality. Many struggled with depression and despair. Some turned to alcohol or gambling as escape from their circumstances. Others threw themselves into religious practices, seeking meaning in spiritual pursuits after the collapse of their worldly purpose. The economic consequences were equally severe. Most samurai lived on stipends provided by their lords, payments that ended immediately upon the dissolution of the domain. Without income, they had to find new ways to support themselves and their families. For men who had been trained from childhood to consider commerce beneath their dignity, this adjustment was particularly difficult. Pride had to be swallowed along with drastically reduced living standards. But not all of them accepted this fate quietly. 47 of these men stayed connected in secret. They plotted carefully. The decision to seek revenge was not made lightly or quickly. It required abandoning any hope of finding new positions or rebuilding their lives within the existing system. It meant accepting that their actions would likely result in their own deaths. Yet for these men, the alternative of living with the shame of their master's unavenged death seemed worse than death itself. The group that formed around this purpose was diverse in age, background, and motivation. Some were senior retainers who had served the Asano family for decades. Others were younger samurai who had barely begun their careers when the domain was dissolved. A few were not samurai at all, but ashigaru, foot soldiers who served the domain in military capacities. What united them was not social status, but shared commitment to an ideal that transcended their individual circumstances. Their leader was Oishi Yoshio, the former chief retainer of the Ako domain. Oishi was in his late 40s, a man of considerable administrative experience and natural leadership ability. He had served the Asano family faithfully for years, managing the domain's affairs with competence and discretion. His decision to pursue revenge was particularly significant because it meant abandoning not just his own future, but that of his family as well. For nearly 2 years, they watched Kira's movements, studied his routines, and planned their moment. This extended period of preparation was necessary for several reasons. First, they needed to gather intelligence about Kira's household, his security arrangements, and his daily schedule. Second, they had to maintain their cover as ordinary displaced samurai while secretly coordinating their activities. Third, they needed time to acquire weapons and equipment without arousing suspicion. The intelligence gathering was remarkably thorough. They learned the layout of Kira's mansion, the number and quality of his guards, and the habits of his household staff. They identified the best times to attack, when defenses would be lightest and escape routes clearest. They studied the surrounding neighborhood, noting which residents might interfere and which could be counted on to remain indoors. This level of preparation reveals the systematic, almost military approach they took to their mission. To outsiders, they appeared to have abandoned their cause. Some took up menial jobs, working as day laborers or shop assistants. Others pretended to waste their days in gambling and drink, frequenting the entertainment districts and appearing to have given up all pretense of samurai dignity. This deception was crucial to their success, but also personally costly. Men who had spent their lives cultivating reputations for honor and discipline had to watch those reputations crumble as part of their strategy. Oishi himself played this role with particular conviction, earning a reputation as a dissolute former samurai who had turned to drink and prostitutes to forget his troubles. Neighbors reported seeing him stumbling home drunk at all hours, sometimes passed out in the street. His wife, unable to bear the shame of his apparent transformation, divorced him and returned to her family. The personal cost of maintaining this deception was enormous, but it was necessary to convince Kira's spies that he posed no threat. All the while, they maintained contact and coordination, waiting for the right night. Communication was carried out through a network of trusted intermediaries, often merchants or craftsmen, who had connections to the former Ako domain. Messages were coded and disguised as ordinary business correspondence. Meeting places were chosen carefully to avoid suspicion. The level of operational security they maintained was impressive, especially given that they were amateurs in the art of conspiracy. The timing of their attack was influenced by several factors. They needed a night when Kira would be at home, when his guard would be reduced, and when weather conditions would favor their approach. They also had to consider the broader political climate, ensuring that their actions would not be overshadowed by other events or misinterpreted as part of a larger uprising. That night arrived in December. The streets of Edo lay blanketed in snow. The weather was perfect for their purposes, providing cover for their movements while reducing the likelihood that others would be out to witness their actions. Snow muffled sound, making it easier to approach the mansion undetected. It also created treacherous conditions that would slow any pursuit or reinforcement. The Ronin gathered at predetermined points, their armor simple but functional, their swords sharp. They had spent considerable effort acquiring proper equipment without attracting attention. Some pieces were borrowed from sympathetic former colleagues. Others were purchased piecemeal from different sources to avoid suspicion. The armor was practical rather than ornate, designed for stealth and mobility rather than impressive appearance. Their weapons received special attention. Swords were sharpened to razor keenness and tested for balance and reliability. Spears and naginata were prepared for close quarters fighting in confined spaces. They even brought tools for breaking down doors and climbing walls, showing their attention to practical details. Each man knew his role and responsibilities, the result of months of careful planning and rehearsal. Divided into two groups, they surrounded Kira's mansion. One group attacked the front gate, the other scaled the rear walls. The tactical approach was sophisticated, designed to prevent escape while minimizing resistance. The front attack would draw attention and defenders, while the rear group could enter more quietly and secure the interior. Coordination between the two groups was maintained through predetermined signals and timing. The guards were caught off guard. Despite warnings about possible revenge attempts, Kira's household had grown complacent during the long months since Asano's death. The guards were few in number and poorly prepared for a coordinated attack by determined opponents. Most were probably Ashigaru or hired security rather than trained samurai, making them no match for the Ronin's superior skills and motivation. The Ronin moved quickly and with precision, overwhelming the household defenses with minimal bloodshed where possible. Their goal was singular and focused. They were not common thieves or random attackers, but men on a specific mission. This disciplined approach minimized unnecessary violence and demonstrated their continued adherence to samurai principles even while breaking the law. The attack was notable for its restraint as much as its effectiveness. Although they encountered resistance, the Ronin killed only those who posed direct threats to their mission. Servants and family members who offered no resistance were spared. This selective violence reflected their understanding that their quarrel was with Kira alone, not with everyone in his household. They searched the mansion room by room, calling out Kira's name. The systematic search revealed their thorough knowledge of the building's layout, gained through months of surveillance. They checked obvious hiding places first, then moved to more obscure locations. Their calls for Kira served both practical and psychological purposes, letting him know that escape was impossible, while also offering him the chance to face them with dignity. The search took longer than expected, creating tension as time passed and the risk of discovery increased. Each room that failed to yield their target raised the possibility that he had escaped, or was hidden somewhere they had not anticipated. The Ronin remained disciplined, however, methodically checking every possible location without allowing frustration to compromise their mission. They found him hiding in a storage shed, trembling and unarmed. The man who had seemed so powerful and intimidating in the formal settings of Edo Castle appeared pathetic and vulnerable when stripped of his official protections. Contrast was stark and must have been deeply satisfying to the Ronin, who had suffered under his authority for so long. Kira's hiding place was ignoble, suggesting panic rather than calculated strategy. He had apparently abandoned any thought of resistance or dignified confrontation, choosing instead to cower among stored goods and household supplies. This behavior, while understandable from a survival standpoint, violated samurai ideals of courage and honor that the Ronin still respected despite their own illegal actions. According to the code of honor, they offered him the chance to die by his own hand, to perform seppuku and meet death with dignity. This gesture demonstrated their continued respect for proper forms, even while engaged in an act of revenge. By offering Kira the opportunity for honorable suicide, they showed that their quarrel was not with his person, but with his actions, and that they recognized his status as a fellow member of the samurai class. The offer also served practical purposes. If Kira had accepted and performed seppuku, the Ronin could have claimed they were merely witnesses to his suicide rather than his murderers. This might have mitigated their legal culpability, though it was unlikely to save their lives. More importantly, it would have satisfied the demands of honor while avoiding the need for them to personally carry out the execution. Kira refused or was unable to act. Whether this was cowardice, shock, or simply physical incapacity remains unclear. He may have been too frightened to hold a blade steady, or he may have hoped that refusing would somehow lead to mercy or rescue. Perhaps he simply could not bring himself to commit an act that would end his life. Regardless of the honor involved, his refusal forced the Ronin to act directly. The Ronin carried out their mission, ending his life swiftly. The execution was carried out with professional efficiency, showing respect for the gravity of the act even while fulfilling their obligation for revenge. They took no pleasure in the killing, treating it as a necessary duty rather than an act of personal vengeance. The manner of his death was important from a symbolic standpoint. Rather than a prolonged or tortured execution, they granted him a quick end that preserved some measure of dignity. This restrained approach demonstrated their continued adherence to samurai values of proper conduct, even in the midst of what was technically a criminal act. Afterward, they washed Kira's head and placed it in a wooden bucket, carefully covering it. This ritual treatment of his remains showed respect for the deceased, while also fulfilling the requirements of their mission. In the cold morning hours, they carried it through the streets of Edo to the temple where Asano Naganori was buried. There, they laid the head at his grave, completing what they believed was their final duty. The procession through the snowy streets of Edo was both triumphant and solemn. The Ronin walked with dignity, their mission accomplished, but their fate sealed. Citizens who witnessed their passage understood immediately what had happened. Some watched from behind shuttered windows, afraid to be seen observing. Others openly showed their approval, bowing respectfully as the procession passed. At the temple, they performed a final ceremony, offering prayers for both their dead master and their recent victim. This religious observance demonstrated their understanding that even justified killing created karmic consequences that required acknowledgement. They asked for forgiveness and peace for all involved, showing that their actions came from duty rather than hatred. Knowing the consequences, they turned themselves in immediately. This decision was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their entire enterprise. Having successfully completed their revenge, they could have attempted to escape or hide. Instead, they chose to face the legal consequences of their actions, demonstrating their acceptance of the rule of law even while breaking it. Their surrender was carefully orchestrated to maximize its symbolic impact. Rather than slinking away in shame, they presented themselves formally to the authorities, explaining their actions and accepting responsibility. This behavior elevated their crime from mere murder to a principled act of civil disobedience, challenging the system while acknowledging its authority. Public opinion became divided. Some saw them as criminals who had defied the law. Others praised their loyalty and courage. The debate reflected deeper tensions in Japanese society about the relationship between personal honor and legal obligation. The Ronin had acted according to traditional samurai values, but those values were increasingly at odds with the peaceful order the Tokugawa regime was trying to maintain. Support for the Ronin came from various quarters. Many samurai sympathized with their dilemma, understanding the impossible position they had been placed in by their master's death. Common people admired their loyalty and determination, seeing in their actions an inspiring example of dedication to principle. Even some officials privately expressed approval, though they could not do so publicly without undermining their own authority. Opposition came primarily from those who prioritized social order over individual honor. They argued that allowing such acts of private revenge would undermine the entire legal system and return Japan to the chaos of the previous century. If samurai could take the law into their own hands whenever they felt wronged, the peace that had been so carefully constructed would collapse. The shogunate deliberated for weeks, caught between the need to uphold law and order and the cultural admiration for loyalty and bushido. The case presented an unprecedented challenge to Tokugawa jurisprudence. The Ronin had clearly committed murder, but they had done so for reasons that resonated deeply with Japanese values. Punishing them too harshly might create martyrs and encourage others to similar acts. Treating them too leniently would undermine legal authority and set dangerous precedents. The deliberations involved the highest levels of government, including the shogun himself. Legal scholars debated the precedents and implications. Political advisors considered the broader consequences for social stability. Religious leaders offered their perspectives on the moral dimensions of the case. The complexity of the issues involved made quick resolution impossible. Various solutions were proposed and rejected. Some suggested exile rather than death, recognizing the Ronin's honorable motivations while still punishing their illegal actions. Others recommended treating them as common criminals, arguing that the law must be applied equally regardless of motivation. Still others proposed pardoning them entirely, making them examples of the virtues the government wanted to encourage. In the end, the verdict allowed the Ronin to die honorably. They were permitted to commit seppuku one by one, in a ritual that underscored the gravity of their actions, but also preserved their dignity in death. This compromise solution satisfied multiple constituencies while maintaining the government's authority. The Ronin were punished for their crime, but honored for their loyalty. The executions took place over several days, with each man facing death with the composure expected of a samurai. They composed final poems, said farewell to family members, and performed the ritual with dignity. Their behavior in death further enhanced their reputation, demonstrating that their commitment to honor extended even to their final moments. Today, the graves of the 47 Ronin lie near that of their lord, a site still visited by people who quietly bow, leave incense, and reflect on the meaning of duty and sacrifice. The shrine has become a place of pilgrimage for those seeking inspiration in their own struggles with competing obligations. The story continues to resonate because it addresses universal themes of loyalty, justice, and the conflict between individual conscience and social order. Yet, as with many historical legends, the story we tell today is polished and poetic. The actual events were likely more complicated. Some of the Ronin were reluctant. Others hesitated at key moments. The planning was messy, filled with fear and doubt. The image of a unified, unwavering brotherhood may owe more to later playwrights and storytellers than to the real, messy truth of human emotion and conflict. Historical documents reveal that the group faced numerous internal disagreements during their planning phase. Some members wanted to act immediately after Asano's death, while others counseled patience. A few dropped out entirely, unable to commit to what they saw as a suicide mission. The romantic image of perfect unity and determination was largely created by later artistic interpretations. Financial pressures also played a role that is often overlooked in popular retellings. Many of the Ronin were struggling to support their families after losing their stipends. The extended period of preparation required sacrifices that some found difficult to maintain. Personal relationships suffered under the strain of secrecy and deception. The human cost of their mission extended far beyond their own lives. Were they noble heroes or men trapped by a social code that left them no alternative? The answer, like most things in history, lies somewhere in between. Their actions reflect both loyalty and the brutal expectations of a rigid honor system, where failure to avenge a master could mean a lifetime of disgrace. They were products of their time and culture, acting according to values that made sense within their context, but may seem extreme or unnecessary to modern observers. The rigidity of the honor system that governed samurai behavior created impossible situations where individuals were forced to choose between legal compliance and social acceptance. The Ronin faced a world where living with shame was considered worse than dying with honor, where personal relationships were subordinated to abstract principles of loyalty and duty. Their story illuminates both the nobility and the tragedy inherent in such a system. Understanding their motivation requires appreciation for the social pressures they faced. In their world, the opinion of peers and superiors mattered more than personal happiness or even survival. Reputation was a tangible asset that affected not just individual prospects, but the welfare of entire families. The shame of their master's unavenged death would have followed them throughout their lives, affecting their children and grandchildren as well. As the snow settles once more over Edo in your mind's eye, and the streets grow quiet again, we can leave this story behind. Let the figures of the Ronin fade softly into the snowy distance, their tale complete, but their questions lingering. They walk away through the winter night, their footsteps disappearing into the white, leaving us to contemplate the eternal tensions between duty and law, between personal honor and social peace. The snow continues to fall, covering the traces of their passage, softening the harsh edges of their story until it becomes something almost beautiful in its tragedy. The city sleeps on, unaware that it has witnessed events that will be remembered for centuries, that these quiet streets have become the stage for a drama that will inspire and trouble generations of those who hear it. Now, let us step away from this city entirely. Let us drift back even further into Japan's past, to a time of emperors and ancient burial mounds. There, waiting beneath layers of earth and moss, lies a mystery untouched for centuries. A place where history remains sealed away beneath the soil, where the very ground holds secrets that may never be revealed. In the misty mountains of the Nara region, where the morning fog clings to ancient hillsides, and the air itself seems thick with the weight of unspoken stories, stands a tomb that has defied archaeologists and historians for over a millennium. Here, beneath tons of carefully arranged stones, and beneath the protective gaze of imperial prohibition, lies perhaps the greatest enigma in Japanese history. Now, let us drift further back in time. We leave behind the snow-covered streets of Edo and step into a much older chapter of Japan's history. The air feels heavier, as though we are walking through layers of time itself, each breath drawing us deeper into an ancient world where the very ground beneath our feet holds stories that have remained untold for over 15 centuries. The city noise is gone, swallowed by the vastness of time. In its place, there is only the sound of distant birds calling across open water and the soft rustle of wind moving through trees that have grown over generations of silence. We find ourselves standing at the edge of an enormous, moss-covered mound of earth that rises from the landscape like a sleeping giant. This is the Daisen Kofan, believed to be the final resting place of Emperor Nintoku, the 16th Emperor of Japan, according to traditional records. It sits near the modern city of Sakai, south of Osaka, in a region that once served as the political and spiritual heart of ancient Japan. From our position on the ground, it appears as nothing more than a gentle green hill, its slopes covered in dense trees and surrounded by still waters that reflect the changing sky. The casual observer might mistake it for a natural formation, perhaps a ridge left behind by some ancient geological process. But from above, viewed from the perspective of birds or modern aircraft, the full shape reveals itself in all its mysterious precision. A keyhole, a perfect, deliberate design consisting of a circular mound seamlessly connected to a long, narrow, rectangular tail. This distinctive keyhole shape, known as Zenpo-kyun Fun, marks it as one of the grandest burial sites of Japan's ancient Kofan period, at a time when powerful rulers commanded the labor of thousands and left behind monuments that would endure long after their names faded from common memory. The scale of this ancient construction defies easy comprehension. Measuring over 1,500 feet from end to end and spanning nearly 460 feet at its widest point, the tomb is among the largest burial mounds anywhere in the world. Its total area exceeds 120 acres, making it larger even than some of the great pyramids of Egypt when measured by surface area. The circular portion alone rises to a height of nearly 115 feet, a man-made mountain that would have dominated the ancient landscape for miles in every direction. But unlike the stone pyramids of Egypt or the stepped ziggurats of Mesopotamia, this tomb is not constructed from quarried blocks or fired bricks. It is built entirely from earth, millions of cubic feet of soil, shaped and packed by thousands of human hands working in careful coordination. Layer upon layer of dirt was carried from distant sites, mixed with clay and stones, then compacted with wooden tools and human feet until it rose to its final precise form. The engineering required to maintain the tomb's specific angles and proportions, while working with such malleable materials, speaks to a level of mathematical and architectural sophistication that challenges many assumptions about ancient Japanese civilization. As you imagine yourself walking along the designated perimeter today, the atmosphere feels almost sacred, charged with the weight of centuries, and the presence of something far greater than the sum of its earthly materials. The outermost moat, still filled with water after all these years, stretches in a perfect oval around the base of the mound. Its surface acts as a mirror, reflecting the shifting sky above, sometimes brilliant blue on clear days, sometimes pewter gray when clouds gather. The water moves gently, almost imperceptibly, carrying fallen leaves across its surface in slow, hypnotic spirals. Occasionally, a fish will break the surface, sending ripples outward in concentric circles that seem to pulse with the rhythm of time itself. Beyond the moat, a thick ring of trees encircles the entire mound, creating what feels like a natural barrier between the present world and the ancient past. These trees, some of them centuries old themselves, have grown tall and dense over the generations. Their branches interweave to form a continuous canopy that filters the sunlight into dappled patterns of light and shadow. In spring, cherry blossoms bloom among the darker evergreens, creating moments of ethereal beauty that seem to honor the emperor sleeping beneath. In autumn, the leaves turn brilliant shades of red and gold before falling to carpet the walking paths in rustling layers that crunch softly underfoot. The trees serve more than an aesthetic purpose. They are guardians, their roots helping to stabilize the ancient earthwork, while their presence creates a sense of enclosure and reverence. Many of these trees show signs of great age, their trunks thick and gnarled, their bark scarred by decades of weather and seasons. Some bear the marks of lightning strikes, yet continue to thrive, as if drawing strength from their proximity to the imperial presence below. Access to the tomb itself is strictly controlled, more tightly regulated than almost any other historical site in Japan. For generations, these imperial mounds have remained sealed, their secrets protected by both law and tradition. The Imperial Household Agency, which oversees such locations throughout Japan, maintains that the tomb is a sacred resting place of an emperor and should remain forever undisturbed. This position is not merely bureaucratic, but deeply rooted in Shinto, beliefs about the sanctity of burial sites and the ongoing spiritual presence of the deceased emperor. As a result, the contents of the tomb remain completely unknown to modern science and archaeology. There are no contemporary written records describing the burial ceremony or the objects placed within the tomb. No ancient inventories survive. No oral traditions have been passed down with sufficient detail to provide reliable information about what lies beneath the enormous mound of earth. The mystery is absolute and deliberately preserved. There are no modern photographs of the tomb's interior because no modern person has ever seen it. No catalogs of buried treasures exist because no treasures have been cataloged. No lists of artifacts have been compiled because no artifacts have been documented. Everything inside remains exactly as it was when the final shovelful of earth was placed over the entrance. Chamber more than 1,500 years ago, locked away beneath tons of earth and stone, protected by tradition, law, and the simple passage of time. This complete preservation of mystery is almost unique in the modern world. Most ancient sites have been excavated, studied, documented, and their contents dispersed to museums around the globe. The tomb of Tutankhamun was opened and its treasures catalogued. The terracotta warriors of China have been unearthed and studied in minute detail. Even the most sacred sites of antiquity have yielded their secrets to archaeological inquiry. But Emperor Nintoku's tomb remains inviolate, a sealed time capsule from Japan's distant past. Historians and archaeologists can only speculate about what might lie within, basing their educated guesses on smaller tombs from the same period that have been studied. These excavated sites suggest that Emperor Nintoku's burial chamber could hold an extraordinary collection of ceremonial weapons, including swords with intricate metalwork, and handles wrapped in silk or leather that have long since decayed to dust. There may be mirrors, not the simple reflective surfaces we know today, but elaborate bronze mirrors decorated with cosmic symbols and mythological scenes that were believed to connect the earthly realm with the divine. Jewelry likely adorns the emperor's remains, possibly including curved jade ornaments called magatama, which were symbols of imperial power and spiritual authority. Gold and silver ornaments might catch the light if any light were ever allowed to penetrate the burial chamber. There could be elaborate crowns or headdresses, their original materials preserved in the cool, dry conditions that such tombs often maintain. The burial chamber itself probably contains wooden coffins, possibly nested one within another like Russian dolls, each layer representing a different aspect of the emperor's journey from life to death to spiritual continuation. These coffins might be lacquered in brilliant reds and blacks, decorated with paintings or inlaid with precious materials. Around the coffins, lacquered boxes could contain personal items, scrolls, or symbolic objects whose meanings have been lost to time. Objects placed by mourners as tributes might fill the spaces around the central burial. These could include weapons from the emperor's lifetime, vessels for food and drink to sustain him in the afterlife, musical instruments, writing materials, and items of personal significance whose stories died with those who placed them there. The arrangement of these objects likely follows specific ritual patterns, creating a three-dimensional mandala of meaning that reflects the cosmological beliefs of the time. But all of this remains speculation, informed guesswork based on incomplete evidence from other sites. The reality of what lies within Emperor Nintoku's tomb might be far more elaborate than any historian has imagined, or perhaps simpler, or entirely different from the patterns established by other burials. The mystery preserves infinite possibilities. The construction of such a monument would have required an enormous workforce, operating with a level of organization that rivals any ancient civilization. Tens of thousands of laborers likely worked for years, perhaps decades, moving soil basket by basket from quarry sites to the construction area. The logistics alone are staggering to contemplate. Each day, thousands of workers would need to be fed, housed, and organized. Tools would need to be manufactured and maintained. The work sites would need to be coordinated so that different teams could work simultaneously without interfering with each other. The planning phase alone would have taken months or years. Engineers would need to survey the site, design the precise dimensions and angles of the keyhole shape, and calculate the amount of materials required. They would need to plan the water management system that created the surrounding moats and ensured proper drainage. The design of the internal chambers and passages would require careful consideration of structural integrity, ritual requirements, and long-term preservation. During the active construction phase, the site would have resembled a vast anthill of human activity. Workers would form long chains passing baskets of earth from hand to hand, moving tons of material each day. Specialized teams would focus on different aspects of the project, some preparing the foundation, others building the internal chambers, still others working on the exterior shaping and finishing. The sound of thousands of people working together would have filled the air. The scraping of tools against earth, the rhythmic chanting of work songs, the calls of supervisors coordinating different teams, the creaking of wooden equipment, and the splash of water from the irrigation systems that kept the workers supplied. Coordinating food, shelter, and tools for so many workers would have been a monumental task in itself, requiring a sophisticated administrative system. Granaries would need to be built and maintained to store rice and other staples. Temporary housing would shelter workers who came from distant regions. Workshops would produce and repair the wooden tools, baskets, and other equipment necessary for the construction. Medical care would be needed for workers injured in the dangerous work of moving heavy materials and working at heights. Social organization required for such a project reveals much about the power and sophistication of the ancient Japanese state. The emperor would need to command the loyalty or obedience of enough people to provide this massive workforce. He would need access to the agricultural surplus necessary to feed them. He would need the administrative infrastructure to manage such a complex operation. And he would need the cultural authority to justify such an enormous expenditure of human effort and resources. The site was not built in isolation, standing alone in an empty landscape. Instead, it forms the centerpiece of a vast necropolis, a city of the dead that stretches across the surrounding countryside. Smaller satellite tombs dot the area in carefully planned arrangements, believed to hold the remains of nobles, advisors, military commanders, or members of the emperor's extended family. These smaller mounds, while individually impressive, are dwarfed by the emperor's tomb, creating a clear hierarchy even in death. Some of these satellite tombs are simple circular mounds. Others follow the keyhole pattern on a reduced scale. A few are square or rectangular, possibly indicating different ranks or roles within the imperial court. The spacing and orientation of these tombs, relative to each other and to the main mound, suggests a complex set of beliefs about the relationships between the living and the dead, and about the continuation of social structures beyond death. The entire complex forms what archaeologists call a silent city of the dead, preserved under layers of grass, moss, and accumulated organic matter. Walking through this landscape today, one can sense the presence of this ancient community, their individual stories lost, but their collective presence still palpable in the careful arrangement of their final resting places. As you imagine walking along the designated pathways that wind through this ancient necropolis today, there is a profound sense of both calm and curiosity. The paths are well maintained but deliberately unobtrusive, allowing visitors to experience the site without disturbing its essential character. Birds nest in the trees that now grow along the mound, their songs providing a gentle soundtrack to contemplation. Different species have claimed different areas. Crows caw from the highest branches. Smaller songbirds flit through the understory, and occasionally a hawk circles overhead, riding the thermals that rise from the sun-warmed earth. Insects buzz quietly in the underbrush, part of a complex ecosystem that has developed over the centuries of the site's preservation. Butterflies dance among the wildflowers that grow in the clearings, and dragonflies skim the surface of the moats, their wings catching the light like tiny stained glass windows. The sound of their movement creates a subtle background hum that becomes part of the site's meditative atmosphere. The air feels cool and shaded even on the warmest afternoons, thanks to the dense canopy of trees and the cooling effect of the surrounding water. There is often a gentle breeze that moves through the forest, rustling the leaves and carrying the sense of earth, growing things, and the faint mineral smell of ancient stone. During the rainy season, the sound of water dripping from leaf to leaf creates a natural percussion that seems to mark the slow passage of time. Tourists do visit, but they come in small numbers and are restricted to specific viewing areas that maintain appropriate distance from the actual tomb. They pause at designated viewing points, taking photographs of the tree-lined silhouette that hints at the massive structure beneath. Many visitors are struck by the contrast between the tomb's enormous scale and its subtle integration into the natural landscape. From most angles, it appears more like a forested hill than an artificial construction. At nearby shrines, visitors leave small offerings: coins, flowers, folded paper prayers, small bottles of sake or water. These modern tributes create a bridge between contemporary visitors and the ancient practices that once surrounded the emperor's burial. The offerings accumulate over time, are periodically cleaned away by shrine attendants, then begin to accumulate again, creating an ongoing cycle of remembrance and respect. The debate within academic circles continues to simmer, occasionally flaring into public controversy. Some scholars advocate for careful, respectful excavation, using the most advanced archaeological techniques available. They argue that the scientific knowledge gained from studying the tomb could revolutionize our understanding of the Kofun period, a crucial era in Japanese history that remains poorly understood due to the scarcity of written records and the limited number of excavated sites. These advocates point out that the Kofun period, roughly from the 3rd to the 7th century CE, holds many unanswered questions about social structure, political systems, religious practices, and cultural exchange with the Asian mainland. The tomb of such a significant ruler could provide invaluable information about the development of the Japanese state, the evolution of burial practices, the extent of trade networks, and the nature of imperial power during this formative period. They argue that modern archaeological techniques are far more sophisticated and less destructive than those available even a few decades ago. Ground-penetrating radar, 3D imaging, micro-excavation techniques, and advanced preservation methods could allow researchers to study the tomb's contents while maintaining the integrity of the site and showing proper respect for its sacred nature. Furthermore, they contend that knowledge itself is a form of honor, that understanding the emperor's legacy and the achievements of his era serves to preserve and celebrate his memory rather than diminish it. They point to successful excavations of other royal tombs around the world that have enhanced rather than degraded the historical reputation of their occupants. On the other side of the debate, traditionalists argue that the sanctity of the site outweighs any potential scientific benefits. They believe that the tombs should remain untouched, preserving their spiritual significance as places of eternal rest for emperors whose descendants still reign today. This position is deeply rooted in Shinto concepts of purity, respect for ancestors, and the belief that disturbing the dead can have serious spiritual consequences. These advocates emphasize that some things are more important than knowledge, that respect and reverence should take precedence over curiosity, no matter how scholarly or well-intentioned. They argue that the tomb has remained intact for over 1,500 years, precisely because it has been protected from human interference, and that this protection should continue indefinitely. They also point out that the mystery itself has value, that in a world where almost everything has been documented, analyzed, and explained, there is something precious about places that remain unknown. The tomb serves as a reminder that some aspects of human experience transcend the need for scientific understanding. Religious leaders often support this position, arguing that the site serves an ongoing spiritual function that would be compromised by archaeological investigation. The emperor's spirit, they contend, deserves the same respect in death that he commanded in life, and this respect requires leaving his resting place undisturbed. The debate also touches on broader questions about the relationship between science and tradition, between the public's right to knowledge and the importance of preserving sacred spaces, between the global scientific community and local cultural values. These are questions without easy answers, and the tomb of Emperor Nintoku serves as a focal point for discussions that extend far beyond archaeology into philosophy, ethics, and cultural identity. The legal framework surrounding these imperial tombs is complex and deeply embedded in Japanese law. The imperial household agency operates under special provisions that grant it extraordinary authority over these sites. Authority that supersedes normal archaeological protocols and even overrides typical academic freedom principles that govern historical research in democratic societies. This legal protection stems from the Meiji period, when the modern Japanese state was consolidating its power and establishing the emperor as a divine figure whose authority extended backward through time to encompass all previous emperors. The classification of these tombs as imperial mausoleums rather than archaeological sites fundamentally changes how they are regulated and protected. Archaeological sites, even significant ones, are generally subject to scholarly investigation under proper conditions. Imperial mausoleums, however, are treated as active religious sites where the spirits of emperors continue to reside, requiring ongoing ritual maintenance and absolute protection from disturbance. This distinction has practical consequences that extend beyond mere academic access. The areas around the tombs are maintained by specially trained staff who follow protocols established centuries ago. These caretakers perform regular rituals, maintain the physical integrity of the sites, and ensure that the spiritual purity of the locations is preserved. Their work is considered a form of religious service rather than simple groundskeeping, and they undergo training that includes both practical skills and spiritual preparation. The financial resources dedicated to maintaining these sites are substantial, reflecting the Japanese government's commitment to preserving them indefinitely. Annual budgets cover not only physical maintenance, but also security, research into preservation techniques, and the salaries of the specialized staff who tend the sites. The economic impact extends to the surrounding communities, which benefit from tourism while also bearing the responsibility of supporting these ancient monuments. International opinion is divided as well, reflecting broader tensions between scientific inquiry and cultural preservation that play out in archaeological debates worldwide. Some foreign archaeologists and historians express frustration with what they see as Japan's overly restrictive approach to historical sites. They argue that the tombs represent important evidence about human civilization that belongs not just to Japan, but to all humanity, and that withholding this evidence impedes scholarly progress and global understanding. These critics point to the extraordinary scientific advances that have emerged from studying other ancient burial sites. The tomb of Tutankhamun revolutionized understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization. The discovery of C. the Iceman provided unprecedented insights into prehistoric European life. The terracotta warriors of China revealed sophisticated military and artistic practices from the Qin dynasty. Each of these discoveries contributed not just to local knowledge, but to global understanding of human development, technological innovation, and cultural evolution. They argue that Emperor Nintoku's tomb, given its size and significance, could potentially yield discoveries of similar importance. The Kofun period represents a crucial transition in Japanese history, when the archipelago was developing its distinctive cultural identity while maintaining active contact with the Asian mainland. Understanding this period better could illuminate not just Japanese history, but the broader patterns of cultural exchange and political development that shaped East Asia. Furthermore, these critics contend that the technology now available for archaeological investigation is so advanced and non-invasive that it would be possible to study the tomb without causing significant disturbance. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and other remote sensing technologies could reveal the internal structure of the tomb without requiring excavation. If excavation proved necessary, it could be conducted with microsurgical precision, documenting every detail and preserving every artifact according to the highest international standards. Others, however, respect Japan's position and argue that each culture has the right to determine how its historical sites are treated. They point out that Western archaeology has often been criticized for removing artifacts from their cultural contexts and displaying them in foreign museums, and they see Japan's protective approach as a valid alternative to this model. These supporters of Japan's approach emphasize that the country's decision to preserve its imperial tombs intact represents a form of cultural sovereignty that should be respected by the international community. They argue that Japan's approach demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between past and present, recognizing that historical sites continue to serve important cultural and spiritual functions that transcend their potential scientific value. They point to the problematic history of Western archaeology in many parts of the world, where European and American researchers have removed artifacts from their original contexts, often without adequate consultation with local communities or consideration of local values and beliefs. The British Museum's collection of Greek sculptures, the disputes over Native American remains in American museums, and the ongoing debates about the return of African artifacts to their countries of origin all illustrate the complex ethical issues that arise when archaeological investigation conflicts with cultural preservation. Japan's approach, from this perspective, represents a more respectful and sustainable model for managing archaeological sites. Rather than prioritizing scientific access above all other considerations, Japan has chosen to balance multiple values: scientific curiosity, cultural preservation, spiritual respect, and long-term stewardship. This approach recognizes that some forms of knowledge may be less important than preserving the integrity of sacred spaces and honoring the beliefs of both ancient and contemporary communities. The philosophical dimensions of this debate extend into fundamental questions about the nature of knowledge and the purposes of historical investigation. Is the primary goal of archaeology to extract information from the past, or to preserve and honor the past? Should scientific curiosity take precedence over cultural values, or should cultural values constrain scientific inquiry? These questions have no universally accepted answers, and different societies may legitimately reach different conclusions based on their own values and priorities. The tomb of Emperor Nintoku also raises questions about the relationship between individual discovery and collective heritage. If the tomb were excavated and its contents studied, who would benefit from the knowledge gained? Would the discoveries primarily serve the interests of Japanese scholars and the Japanese public, or would they contribute to global understanding? Would the artifacts remain in Japan or be shared with international museums? These questions about the ownership and distribution of archaeological knowledge are particularly complex when dealing with sites of such cultural and spiritual significance. The passage of time itself has become part of the tomb's significance. The fact that it has remained sealed for over 1,500 years is now part of its historical importance. Each year that passes without excavation adds to the tomb's unique status as one of the world's most significant unopened archaeological sites. This temporal dimension creates a paradox. The longer the tomb remains closed, the more valuable it becomes both as a potential source of scientific knowledge and as a symbol of cultural preservation. The technological evolution of archaeological methods also affects this debate. Techniques that were unimaginable when the current preservation policies were established are now routine parts of archaeological investigation. Future developments may make it possible to study the tomb's contents without any physical intrusion whatsoever, potentially resolving the conflict between scientific inquiry and cultural preservation. However, the pace of technological change also means that current decisions about the tomb's future may be overtaken by capabilities that cannot yet be imagined. The educational impact of the sealed tomb is substantial and multifaceted. For Japanese students, the tomb serves as a tangible connection to their ancient history and a symbol of cultural continuity. School groups regularly visit the site, where they learn not just about the Kofun period, but about the ongoing responsibility of preserving cultural heritage. The tomb becomes a teaching tool for discussions about respect, tradition, and the balance between progress and preservation. For international visitors, the tomb offers a different kind of educational experience. Many come expecting to see artifacts and exhibitions, only to discover that the most significant aspect of the site is what cannot be seen. This reversal of expectations often proves more memorable and thought-provoking than traditional museum displays. Visitors leave with a deeper appreciation for the complexity of cultural preservation and the recognition that some forms of value cannot be quantified or displayed. The tomb's influence extends into contemporary Japanese culture in unexpected ways. Artists and writers have drawn inspiration from its mystery, creating works that explore themes of hidden knowledge, the passage of time, and the relationship between past and present. The tomb appears in literature, film, and other media as a symbol of Japan's deep historical roots and its commitment to preserving cultural authenticity in an increasingly globalized world. The maintenance of the tomb and its surrounding landscape requires ongoing adaptation to changing environmental conditions. Climate change, urban development, and shifts in local ecosystems all pose potential threats to the site's long-term preservation. The caretakers must balance traditional preservation methods with new approaches designed to address contemporary challenges while maintaining the site's essential character. Water management remains a critical concern, as the moats and drainage systems require regular maintenance to prevent erosion and flooding. The tree cover must be managed to prevent damage from storms while maintaining the natural beauty that has become part of the site's appeal. Wildlife management ensures that the ecosystem remains healthy while preventing damage to the ancient earthworks. The surrounding urban development presents both opportunities and challenges. The growing city of Sakai brings increased tourism and economic benefits, but also air pollution, noise, and the pressures of modern life that can detract from the tomb's contemplative atmosphere. Urban planners must work carefully to balance development with preservation, ensuring that the tomb's setting remains appropriate for its spiritual and historical significance. For now, the answer remains silence. The tomb stays closed, its entrance sealed beneath tons of earth and centuries of accumulated soil. Its contents remain hidden, known only to whatever spirits might inhabit the burial chamber and to the emperor himself. If his consciousness persists in whatever form the ancient beliefs suggested it might, the scientific community continues to develop new approaches that might eventually resolve the conflict between investigation and preservation. Advances in remote sensing technology, artificial intelligence, and non-invasive analysis techniques hold promise for future breakthroughs that could reveal the tomb's secrets without requiring physical excavation. Researchers are exploring methods using cosmic ray imaging, advanced ground-penetrating radar, and even quantum sensors that might penetrate the Earth mound and create detailed maps of its internal structure. These technological possibilities add another layer to the ongoing debate. If it becomes possible to study the tomb's contents without disturbing the site, would this satisfy both scientific curiosity and cultural preservation concerns? Or would even non-invasive investigation be seen as a violation of the tomb's sanctity? The development of such technologies may eventually force a reconsideration of current policies, but for now, they remain experimental and unproven. The tomb's influence on archaeological methodology extends beyond Japan. The global archaeological community has been forced to grapple with questions about cultural sensitivity, indigenous rights, and the ethics of excavation, partly because of the example set by sites like Emperor Nintoku's tomb. The Japanese approach has encouraged archaeologists worldwide to consider whether their research methods adequately respect the values and beliefs of the communities whose heritage they study. This influence is particularly evident in the development of community archaeology, a field that emphasizes collaboration between professional archaeologists and local communities. The Japanese model demonstrates that archaeological sites can serve important cultural functions beyond their scientific value, and that preservation strategies must account for ongoing spiritual and cultural relationships with ancient sites. The tomb also serves as a case study in the economics of cultural preservation. The cost of maintaining the site indefinitely, without any prospect of recovering expenses through exhibition or research, demonstrates a commitment to non-monetary values that challenges conventional approaches to cultural resource management. This economic model has influenced preservation policies for other sites around the world, showing that some cultural values justify significant ongoing investment without expectation of financial return. The educational programs associated with the tomb have evolved to address contemporary issues while maintaining respect for traditional values. School curricula now include discussions about cultural heritage, environmental stewardship, and the complex relationship between scientific progress and cultural preservation. Students learn to think critically about competing values and to understand that some questions may not have clear answers. The tomb's role in contemporary Japanese identity formation is subtle but significant. In a rapidly changing society, where traditional values often conflict with modern pressures, the tomb serves as a symbol of continuity and authenticity. It represents a connection to the past that transcends political changes, economic fluctuations, and social transformations. For many Japanese people, the tomb's endurance and mystery provide a sense of stability and rootedness in an uncertain world. The international diplomatic implications of the tomb's preservation also deserve consideration. Japan's approach to the tomb has become part of its cultural diplomacy, demonstrating the country's commitment to preserving its heritage while engaging with the global community. This approach has enhanced Japan's reputation as a responsible steward of cultural resources and has influenced international discussions about cultural heritage protection. The tomb's preservation has also contributed to broader discussions about sustainable tourism and cultural site management. The site attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, yet the experience is deliberately limited and controlled. This approach demonstrates that cultural sites can be made accessible to the public without compromising their integrity or significance. The model has influenced tourism management strategies for other sensitive cultural sites around the world. Nature continues its slow work of transformation, softening the tomb's edges and covering it with ever thicker layers of green growth. Each spring, new shoots emerge from the soil, their roots intertwining with the ancient earth and creating an increasingly complex underground network that helps stabilize the structure while adding new layers of organic matter. Each autumn, more leaves fall to decompose and enrich the earth, creating a natural cycle of renewal that seems to honor the emperor's memory through the ongoing vitality of the living world. The decomposition process itself becomes part of the tomb's story. Fallen leaves break down into organic compounds that feed the soil, which in turn nourishes the plants whose roots help hold the ancient earthwork together. This cycle of death and renewal, decay and growth, creates a kind of natural memorial that changes constantly while remaining fundamentally stable. The tomb becomes a living monument, sustained by the very processes of natural change that it has witnessed for centuries. Rain soaks into the mound, carrying nutrients deeper into the soil and supporting the complex root systems that help hold the ancient structure together. The water cycle becomes part of the tomb's preservation system, with seasonal rains replenishing the moisture that keeps the earth from drying out and cracking, while the deep root systems help prevent erosion and maintain the structural integrity of the slopes. This natural engineering system, developed over centuries of interaction between human construction and natural processes, proves more durable than many modern preservation techniques. Birds drop seeds that grow into new trees, creating an ever-changing but consistently green canopy that filters sunlight and creates the contemplative atmosphere that visitors find so moving. Different species of birds have established territories within the tomb complex, creating a vertical ecosystem that extends from the ground-dwelling insects through the understory shrubs to the canopy dwellers, who build their nests in the highest branches. The tomb has become a refuge for wildlife, a green island in an increasingly urbanized landscape. Insects create homes in the bark and soil, establishing complex communities that process organic matter, aerate the soil, and support the food webs that sustain the larger animals. The tomb's ecosystem includes countless species of beetles, ants, spiders, and other arthropods, each playing a role in maintaining the biological processes that keep the site healthy and stable. This invisible world of small creatures contributes as much to the tomb's preservation as the more visible work of human caretakers. The tomb has become not just a monument to human achievement, but a thriving ecosystem in its own right, demonstrating how cultural preservation and environmental conservation can support each other. The protection of the tomb has inadvertently created a preserved habitat for plants and animals that might otherwise be displaced by urban development. The site serves as a biological as well as cultural heritage, preserving both human history and natural diversity. The seasonal cycles that play out around the tomb create a natural calendar that connects contemporary visitors with the ancient rhythms that would have governed the emperor's life. Spring brings cherry blossoms that bloom in spectacular profusion, their pink and white petals creating a scene of ethereal beauty that draws photographers and poets. The blossoms fall within days, carpeting the ground with a reminder of the transience of beauty and the inevitability of change. Summer brings dense green foliage and the sound of cicadas, whose rhythmic chorus creates a natural soundtrack that seems to pulse with the heartbeat of the ancient earth. The thick canopy provides cool shade even on the hottest days, creating microclimates that support different plant communities and provide refuge for both wildlife and human visitors. The sound of summer rain pattering on leaves creates a meditative atmosphere that encourages quiet reflection. Autumn paints the trees in brilliant colors before winter strips them bare, revealing the underlying structure of the mound in stark detail. The seasonal transformation exposes the tomb's architectural precision while simultaneously demonstrating the natural processes that have shaped it over centuries. The bare branches create intricate patterns against the sky, while the fallen leaves provide a soft carpet that cushions footsteps and deadens sound. Snow occasionally dusts the tomb's surface, creating a scene of pristine beauty that seems to honor the emperor's memory with nature's own offering. The white covering simplifies the landscape, reducing it to essential forms and creating a sense of purity and transcendence that many visitors find spiritually moving. The snow also provides a natural preservative, protecting the vegetation from temperature extremes and providing moisture that will support spring growth. Through all these changes, the tomb endures. The passage of time that erases buildings and monuments seems only to strengthen its presence in the landscape. Unlike structures built of stone or metal, which weather and decay, the earth mound seems to grow more integrated with its surroundings each year, more natural, more permanent. The tomb has achieved a kind of immortality through its integration with natural processes, becoming part of the landscape itself, rather than merely an object placed within it. As we take one last mental walk along the moat, listening to the sound of breeze moving through leaves and a gentle lapping of water against the earthen banks, we can let the mystery rest for now. There is something appropriate about leaving some stories unfinished, some places free to guard their secrets. In a world that increasingly demands that everything be known, documented, and explained, the tomb of Emperor Nintoku stands as a reminder that mystery itself has value. The unknowing creates a space for imagination, for wonder, for the recognition that human understanding has limits. The sealed tomb speaks not just of an ancient emperor's power, but of the enduring human need for places that remain beyond our complete comprehension. It reminds us that respect sometimes requires restraint, that the greatest honor we can pay to the past might be to let it remain past. Some stories in history remain unfinished, not because we lack the tools to complete them, but because completing them would diminish their power. Some places prefer to guard their secrets, not out of stubbornness, but out of wisdom. The tomb of Emperor Nintoku has chosen silence, and perhaps that silence is its greatest gift to the modern world. And now, let us slowly step forward again through time, our footsteps carrying us away from the moss-covered mounds and the quiet hillsides where ancient emperors sleep their eternal sleep. We leave behind the birdsong and the gentle lapping of moat water, the filtered sunlight, and the whispering trees. Our path leads us across the centuries, through the rise and fall of dynasties, through the development of new forms of government and new expressions of power. We move from the raw earthen monuments of the Kofan period towards something more refined, more calculated, more consciously artful. The imperial power that once expressed itself through massive earthworks and the marshalling of thousands of laborers will transform into something more subtle, but no less impressive. We travel toward a world where power speaks not through the scale of monuments, but through the precision of ceremony, where strength is demonstrated not through the movement of mountains of earth, but through the perfect control of human behavior. Our path leads us to the heart of Edo once more, but this time not to the bustling streets, where merchants hawk their wares and common people live their daily lives, not to the training grounds where samurai perfected their deadly arts. Instead, we will enter the polished hallways and carefully arranged rooms of the Shogun's court, where a different kind of tomb awaits us. Not a tomb of earth and stone, but a tomb of ritual and tradition, where the living entomb themselves in elaborate ceremonies that are both beautiful and deadly in their precision. It is a world of measured steps and calculated words, where every gesture carries multiple meanings and every silence speaks volumes. A place where stillness speaks louder than action, where the rustle of silk can be more significant than the clash of steel, and where every movement, no matter how small, holds the potential to shift the balance of an entire nation. Here, in the shadowed halls of power, we will discover how the dead weight of tradition can be both the foundation of stability and the seed of revolution. Now let us step quietly back into Edo. This time, our path does not lead us through crowded streets or past soldiers on muddy training grounds. Instead, we pass through large stone gates, can enter a different world entirely. We are inside Edo Castle, the political and administrative heart of the Tokugawa shogunate. The massive gates themselves tell the story of power and permanence. Each stone, some weighing several tons, was quarried from distant mountains and hauled here by teams of oxen and hundreds of laborers working under the most demanding conditions. The construction of these walls took decades, requiring the coordination of craftsmen from across Japan, each bringing specialized skills passed down through generations of their families. Master stonemasons from the provinces around Mount Fuji selected and shaped each block, their tools creating surfaces so perfectly fitted that no mortar was needed to bind them together. The very presence of these walls speaks to the unshakable authority of the Tokugawa clan, but also to their understanding that true power must be made visible, tangible, overwhelming in its physical reality. The gates are adorned with metalwork that represents some of the finest craftsmanship of the era. Bronze fittings, their surfaces developing a patina that speaks of centuries of weather and wear, bear them on, or family crests of the Tokugawa. These symbols appear throughout the castle complex, a constant reminder of whose authority governs this space. The wood used in the gate construction came from forests that had been growing for centuries before the first Tokugawa drew breath. Trees selected not just for their strength, but for their spiritual significance in Shinto tradition. As we pass beneath their shadow, we leave behind the mercantile energy of the city and enter a realm where every element has been carefully orchestrated to inspire both reverence and submission. The transition is immediate and profound. The sounds of commerce, the calls of street vendors, the clatter of wooden wheels on stone, all fade to silence. The very air seems thicker here, weighted with the accumulated authority of generations. The air here feels different. It is still and controlled. The gravel paths inside the castle complex have been raked carefully, their patterns creating subtle waves that catch and reflect the morning light. No leaf is permitted to rest where it has fallen. No stone sits unaligned. The wooden floors of the corridors are polished to a soft glow, their surfaces so pristine that they seem to absorb sound itself. Every surface, from the neatly arranged stones in the gardens to the perfectly hung scrolls on the walls, seems to exist in quiet, deliberate harmony. This harmony is not accidental. It is the product of centuries of refinement, a physical manifestation of the philosophical principles that govern samurai society. The concept of wa, or harmony, permeates every aspect of court life. It is visible in the way morning mist settles over the carefully pruned pine trees, each branch shaped by hands that understood the aesthetic principles inherited from Chinese masters, but refined according to Japanese sensibilities. The pine trees themselves were selected as saplings decades before they were planted here, their growth carefully guided through techniques that bend nature to artistic will without breaking its essential spirit. The precise spacing between stepping stones across ornamental streams follows mathematical principles that create visual balance while accommodating the natural flow patterns of water. These streams originate from springs deep within the castle grounds, their sources considered sacred and protected by Shinto taboos that forbid contamination or casual approach. The water flows through channels lined with carefully selected river stones, each one positioned to create the perfect sound as water passes over its surface. The subtle gradations of color that mark the changing seasons in the court's meticulously maintained gardens represent a level of horticultural sophistication that required the services of master gardeners, whose knowledge was considered as valuable as that of military strategists. These gardens serve multiple purposes beyond mere aesthetic pleasure. They provide spaces for contemplation and private conversation, their winding paths creating opportunities for political discussion away from the formal audience chambers. The selection of plants reflects both seasonal appropriateness and symbolic meaning, with flowering trees chosen for their associations with particular virtues or historical events. Cherry trees remind viewers of the transient nature of life and beauty, while bamboo groves symbolize flexibility and strength, their ability to bend without breaking, serving as metaphors for proper political conduct. The life of a court official or high-ranking samurai here is governed by ceremony and routine that has been refined over generations to eliminate any possibility of spontaneous action or uncontrolled expression. Every action has its place within a complex system of protocols that serve both practical and symbolic functions. Every word is weighed before it is spoken, considered not only for its immediate meaning, but for its potential interpretations by different listeners, its historical associations, and its adherence to the elaborate codes of politeness that govern all social interaction within the castle walls. Silence is common, not as a sign of awkwardness, but as an accepted part of communication that carries its own meanings and serves its own purposes. The ability to remain comfortable in extended silence marks the difference between those truly adapted to court life and those still influenced by the more direct communication styles of the world beyond the castle walls. To speak too soon or too loudly would be seen as a breach of decorum that could echo through one's career for years to come, marking the offender as someone lacking the self-discipline essential for positions of trust and authority. In this environment, reputation is built grain by grain, like sand in an hourglass, accumulated through countless small demonstrations of proper behavior, cultural knowledge, and unwavering loyalty. A single thoughtless word, an inappropriate gesture, a moment of emotional display can destroy the work of decades, reducing a carefully constructed career to ruins. The awareness of this precarious balance creates an atmosphere of constant vigilance, where spontaneity becomes dangerous and calculation essential for survival. The day begins before dawn for most court residents, their schedules regulated by bells that sound at precise intervals throughout the complex. In the pre-dawn darkness, servants light paper lanterns throughout the castle complex, following routes that have been established through centuries of practice. Their warm glow creates pools of light in the corridors, but the illumination is carefully controlled, bright enough to guide movement, but subdued enough to maintain the contemplative atmosphere that pervades the castle even during its most active hours. The first ritual of the day is the morning purification, where court officials wash their hands and mouths at stone basins fed by springs that originate deep within the castle grounds. These springs are considered sacred, their waters blessed by Shinto priests in ceremonies that few outsiders ever witness. The water is always cold, a reminder that comfort must never supersede duty, that the path of service requires constant acceptance of minor discomforts that strengthen the will and sharpen the mind. The purification ritual itself follows forms that connect the participants to spiritual traditions stretching back centuries. The act of washing becomes a moment of meditation, a transition from the private self to the public role that each court member must assume upon entering the shared spaces of the castle. The cold water serves as a physical reminder of the discipline required for court life, while the ritual movements provide a sense of continuity with the countless other mornings when previous generations performed the same acts in the same locations. Imagine yourself walking through these long, open corridors as the first light of day filters through the paper screens. The scent of hinoki wood fills the air, that distinctive aroma of Japanese cypress that has been prized for centuries for its calming properties and natural resistance to decay. The wood itself was selected from ancient forests, trees that had grown for hundreds of years before being deemed worthy of inclusion in the shogun's residence. Paper screens line the hallways, their surfaces painted with subtle landscapes or calligraphy, gently diffusing the morning light into soft, even illumination that never creates harsh shadows. You may hear the distant chirp of a bird from the inner garden, perhaps a nightingale whose song has been celebrated in court poetry for generations, and whose presence here is no accident. These birds are attracted by specific plantings and water features designed to create optimal conditions for their nesting and singing. Their songs provide natural music that changes with the seasons, creating a living soundtrack that connects the artificial perfection of the castle to the rhythms of the natural world. The soft trickle of water from an ornamental pond where koi swim in slow, meditative circles creates another layer of this carefully orchestrated soundscape. These fish, some of them decades old and worth small fortunes, represent living art pieces whose movements add animation to the otherwise static perfection of their surroundings. The ponds themselves are engineering marvels, their depths and filtration systems maintaining water clarity that allows every pebble on the bottom to be visible, every movement of the fish to be followed with perfect clarity. These sounds are not random. They have been carefully cultivated over generations. The gardens are designed to provide a soundtrack of natural beauty, with bamboo fountains that fill and tip at precise intervals, creating a rhythmic counterpoint to the silence. The positioning of these fountains required careful calculation of water pressure, bamboo selection, and stone placement to achieve the desired acoustic effect. The sound they produce is said to aid in meditation, its regular rhythm helping to calm the mind and promote the contemplative state essential for wise decision-making. Servants move with careful steps, their white tabi socks making no sound on the polished floors. They bow slightly as they pass, their faces remaining composed, offering no sign of emotion. These servants represent generations of families who have served the Tokugawa, their very presence a testament to the stability and continuity of the regime. Their training begins in childhood, learning not just practical skills, but the subtle art of invisibility, of anticipating needs before they are expressed, of maintaining the seamless operation of court life without ever drawing attention to themselves. The hierarchy within the castle is as complex as it is invisible to casual observation. A visitor might see only the serene flow of daily life, but beneath this surface runs a current of precise social stratification that governs every interaction. Every person, from the highest-ranking daimyo to the most junior servant, knows exactly their place in this elaborate structure, their position determined by birth, achievement, and the complex web of obligations that bind the samurai class together. The communication of status happens through a language of objects and gestures that requires years of study to fully comprehend. The width of one's sleeves indicates rank within the court hierarchy, with measurements prescribed by regulations that specify the exact dimensions appropriate to to each level of authority. The pattern of one's kimono tells a story of family history, seasonal awareness, and aesthetic sophistication, with certain designs reserved for specific occasions or restricted to particular ranks. The materials from which one's fan is crafted communicate not only wealth, but cultural knowledge, with the finest fans made from rare woods and decorated with paintings or calligraphy by recognized masters. Even the way one walks through the castle corridors follows protocols that reflect and reinforce social position. The length of one's stride, the positioning of one's hands, the angle at which one holds one's head, all of these communicate status with the precision of a mathematical formula. Those of higher rank move with a deliberate slowness that emphasizes their freedom from urgency, while lower-ranking individuals adopt a more rapid pace that suggests awareness of their duty to accomplish tasks efficiently. The very sound of footsteps on the polished floors creates a kind of music that trained ears can interpret to identify the rank and purpose of anyone moving through the building. Inside the audience chambers, the mood is even more restrained. These rooms represent the apex of Japanese architectural and artistic achievement. The tatami mats are woven from the finest straw, their edges bound with silk brocade in patterns that have remained unchanged for centuries. The supporting pillars are made from single pieces of wood, carefully selected to showcase the natural grain, then polished to a finish so perfect that they seem to glow from within. Daimyo from distant provinces kneel in perfect rows, their posture reflecting years of training in proper court deportment. They have traveled for days, sometimes weeks, to fulfill their obligation of alternate attendance, a policy known as Senkin Katai that requires them to spend part of the year in Edo. This system, brilliant in its simplicity, ensures that the most powerful lords in Japan are kept under the Shogun's watchful eye, while their families serve as effective hostages for their continued loyalty. The journey to Edo is itself a demonstration of power and submission that serves multiple political functions beyond the simple requirement of attendance. Each daimyo travels with a procession that reflects his wealth and status, but the very fact that he must make this journey year after year serves as a reminder of his subordinate position. The size of his retinue, the quality of his horses, the elaborateness of his traveling clothes, all of these elements are carefully observed and reported by the shogun's agents, creating an ongoing assessment of each domain's financial health and political reliability. The roads they travel are maintained at great expense by the Tokugawa government, their quality, serving as both a demonstration of administrative competence and a practical necessity for the movement of the large processions required by the Senkin Katai system. These roads are lined with official stopping places where daimyo must present documents and submit to inspection. Their movements tracked and recorded by an administrative apparatus that rivals anything existing in the contemporary world. The stopping places themselves, known as post stations, represent significant investments in infrastructure and security. Each one is staffed by officials whose primary loyalty is to the Tokugawa rather than to any local authority, creating a network of surveillance that extends throughout the realm. The records kept at these stations provide the central government with detailed information about the movement of people and goods, the financial resources of different domains, and the relationships between various noble families. By the time the daimyo reach the castle, they have been reminded at every step of their journey that they enter not as equals, but as vassals. The contrast between their treatment on the road, where they are accorded the respect due to their rank, and their position within the castle, where they must wait for hours to be acknowledged by the shogun, serves as a powerful psychological reinforcement of the political reality that governs their relationship with the central authority. The tension in the audience chamber is subtle but ever present. A single misplaced gesture could mean the loss of favor or worse. The daimyo understand that they are being observed, not just by the shogun, but by each other, that every interaction might be reported back to distant provinces, that alliances and enmities can be forged or shattered by a glance or a gesture. In this atmosphere, paranoia becomes a survival skill, and trust a luxury few can afford. Every item in the room is symbolic. The placement of cushions reflects the complex web of relationships between the various domains. Those closest to the shogun's position enjoy not just physical proximity, but the implicit suggestion of favor. The hanging of calligraphy scrolls, chosen from works by revered masters, carries messages that might be interpreted differently by different observers. The angle of the incense burner, the selection of flowers in the alcove, the choice of ceramic pieces for the tea service, none of it happens by accident. Every element has been considered, debated, and positioned with the understanding that in this environment, symbolism carries the weight of policy. The shogun himself speaks rarely. When he does, his words are brief, measured, and often carry multiple layers of meaning that will be discussed and analyzed long after the audience has ended. His voice is soft, requiring those present to lean forward slightly to catch every syllable, a physical gesture that emphasizes their dependence on his every word. He might make an oblique reference to a poem written centuries ago, knowing that his meaning will be clear to those educated in classical literature, while remaining opaque to others. This use of cultural reference as a form of communication creates an inner circle of understanding, separating those with true cultural literacy from mere pretenders. Those present listen carefully, parsing each sentence for clues to his mood or his intentions. A slight emphasis on a particular word might signal displeasure with a distant province's tax collection. A pause before mentioning a particular domain might suggest that its lord's loyalty is under scrutiny. In this environment, the ability to read such subtle signals becomes crucial to survival and advancement. The shogun's physical presence is itself carefully orchestrated. His clothing, made from the finest silk and dyed with colors so rich they seem to absorb light, is changed several times throughout the day to reflect different ceremonial requirements. His fan, carved from rare woods and decorated with gold leaf, becomes an extension of his authority, its movements as carefully choreographed as a dancer's gestures. Even his breathing seems deliberate, controlled, as if every aspect of his being has been refined to embody the perfect expression of absolute power. Behind the shogun, visible through partially open screens, stand his most trusted advisors. These men, known as Ryu, represent the administrative backbone of the Tokugawa government. They are chosen not for noble birth, but for intelligence, loyalty, and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate their master's needs. They communicate with each other through subtle gestures, their coordination so perfect that they seem to share a single mind. When the shogun requires a document, it appears before he asks for it. When he pauses for tea, a perfect temperature cup materializes at his side without any visible signal being given. Meals within the court are also highly ritualized affairs that can stretch for hours. The preparation begins days in advance, with chefs consulting ancient texts to ensure that every dish conforms to seasonal appropriateness and symbolic meaning. Dishes arrive in a specific order, each presentation timed to the moment, presented with attention to seasonal colors and ingredients that reflect not just culinary skill, but deep understanding of natural cycles and aesthetic principles. The arrangement of food on each tray reflects both aesthetic values and cultural symbolism. A particular vegetable might be cut and arranged to suggest the wing of a crane, symbolizing longevity and good fortune. The color of the ceramic might echo the hue of autumn leaves or spring blossoms, connecting the diners to the natural world, even within the artificial perfection of the castle. The very temperature at which each dish is served has been calculated to provide the optimal experience, with some foods served so hot that steam rises like incense, while others are chilled to provide contrast and refresh the palate. Eating is done slowly, with appreciation, not just for flavor, but for the visual beauty of each plate. Conversation during meals follows strict protocols, with topics ranging from classical poetry to observations about the weather, never touching on matters of immediate political significance. The act of eating becomes a meditation, each bite savored not just for its taste, but for its place in the larger composition of the meal. The serving vessels themselves are works of art, some crafted by masters whose families have served the Tokugawa for generations, others ancient pieces collected from temples and noble houses throughout Japan. Each bowl, each chopstick rest, each serving spoon carries with it history and significance that adds layers of meaning to the dining experience. To dine in the shogun's presence is to participate in a living museum of Japanese culture, where every object tells a story of craftsmanship, aesthetics, and power. In quieter moments, court life turns toward the arts. Poetry readings, tea ceremonies, and no performances provide structured forms of entertainment that serve multiple purposes beyond mere amusement. These activities allow court members to demonstrate their cultural refinement while providing opportunities for subtle political maneuvering and alliance building. Poetry readings follow ancient forms that require years of study to master. The ability to compose an appropriate verse in response to a given theme, incorporating classical references while demonstrating original insight, marks the difference between a mere functionary and a true cultural participant. These sessions might last for hours, with participants taking turns offering compositions that are then critiqued and appreciated by their peers. The subjects chosen for these poetic exercises often reflect current concerns disguised as aesthetic contemplation, allowing for political commentary that would be impossible in more direct forms. Tea ceremonies represent perhaps the highest expression of Japanese aesthetic philosophy. Each activity follows strict patterns of behavior that have been refined over centuries. During a tea ceremony, even the simple act of folding a cloth to wipe the tea bowl follows a prescribed series of steps, each movement designed to embody principles of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. There is comfort in this repetition, but also profound meaning. It offers both host and guest a shared understanding of their roles, while creating a temporary space where social hierarchies, while never forgotten, can be temporarily softened by shared participation in ancient ritual. The tea itself is prepared with water drawn from wells that have been blessed by Shinto priests, whisked with bamboo implements crafted by artisans whose families have specialized in this craft for generations. The tea bowls are chosen specifically for each occasion, their imperfections celebrated as expressions of natural beauty rather than flaws to be corrected. In the way the light falls across the tea's surface, in the sound of the kettle as water reaches the perfect temperature, in the silence that follows the last sip, participants find moments of transcendence that lift them above the mundane concerns of daily court life. No performances bring together music, dance, and drama in presentations that can last entire days. The actors, their faces hidden behind masks that have been carved by master craftsmen, embody characters from classical literature, historical figures, and supernatural beings. The stories they tell often contain moral lessons relevant to contemporary political situations, allowing the audience to contemplate questions of loyalty, duty, and honor without directly addressing current controversies. The stage for these performances is itself sacred space, built according to proportions that create perfect acoustics and sightlines. The polished wooden floor resonates with each footstep, the sound becoming part of the performance. Musicians seated at the back of the stage provide accompaniment that follows rhythms so ancient that their origins are lost in legend. The entire presentation unfolds at a pace that seems to slow time itself, creating a meditative state in both performers and audience. For courtiers and high-ranking samurai, life inside the shogun's castle can feel both peaceful and suffocating. The beauty and refinement of their surroundings provide constant aesthetic pleasure, but the restrictions and expectations of court life can weigh heavily on those who must navigate its complexities day after day. Every action must be considered, every word weighed, every gesture calculated for its potential consequences. Every day blends into the next, marked by small changes in routine or rare announcements from the shogun's chambers. The passing of seasons becomes crucial in providing variety to otherwise unchanging days. The appearance of the first cherry blossoms, the sound of autumn leaves rustling in the courtyard, the sight of snow covering the carefully shaped pine trees, these natural markers become events of genuine significance in lives otherwise governed by human protocol. Social advancement is slow and depends on connections, loyalty, and an unblemished record of service. A career that spans decades might result in only modest elevation in rank, while a single mistake can destroy the work of a lifetime. Behind each calm conversation, layers of politics unfold in silence. Alliances shift like shadows as the sun moves across the courtyard. Small gestures carry great weight, and the ability to interpret the subtle signals of court life becomes essential for survival. The castle's intelligence network rivals anything that exists in the outside world. Information flows through channels, both official and unofficial, carried by servants who seem invisible, but whose eyes and ears miss nothing. A casual comment made in private might be repeated in the shogun's chambers within hours. A letter received from a distant province will be read by multiple sets of eyes before reaching its intended recipient. In this environment, privacy becomes an illusion, and the wise learn to conduct their most sensitive communications through methods that leave no traceable record. Romance, when it occurs within the castle walls, must navigate even more complex waters than those that govern ordinary political relationships. Marriages are arranged not for love, but for political advantage, connecting families and domains in webs of mutual obligation that can influence policy decisions for generations. The negotiation of these marriages involves considerations that extend far beyond the personal compatibility of the intended partners, encompassing questions of military alliance, economic cooperation, and the balance of power between different regions of the realm. Yet within these constraints, genuine affection sometimes blooms, creating bonds that must be carefully hidden lest they be perceived as potential security risks that might compromise the rational calculation that should govern all political relationships. The expression of emotion, so restricted in public life, finds outlet in private poetry exchanges, in carefully coded letters that use classical literary references to communicate feelings that cannot be spoken directly, and in glances exchanged across crowded rooms that speak volumes while revealing nothing to casual observers. The gardens provide the primary venues for these carefully concealed romantic interactions. Certain paths, certain viewing points, certain seasonal displays become associated with particular couples, creating a geography of affection that exists parallel to the official maps of the castle grounds. A poem left beneath a specific stone, a flower arrangement that incorporates a subtle message, a deliberately dropped fan that creates an excuse for conversation. All of these techniques allow emotional expression within the rigid constraints of court protocol. The seasonal festivals that punctuate court life provide welcome breaks from routine, but even these celebrations follow strict protocols that have been refined over generations. Each festival serves multiple purposes, combining religious observance, political demonstration, and social interaction in carefully orchestrated events that reinforce the cultural values and power relationships that govern castle life. The spring flower viewing parties, known as hanami, transform the castle gardens into venues for elaborate outdoor ceremonies. Temporary pavilions are erected at strategic viewing points, their positioning determined by both aesthetic considerations and the complex requirements of social hierarchy. The most privileged guests receive positions that offer the best views of the cherry blossoms, while the arrangement of seating reflects and reinforces the subtle gradations of rank that govern all social interaction within the castle. Autumn moon viewing gatherings, called tsukimi, provide opportunities for evening socializing that follows different protocols than the daytime ceremonies. Lanterns illuminate the gardens, creating an atmosphere of mystery and romance that allows for slightly more relaxed social interaction while still maintaining the essential boundaries that separate different ranks and factions. The viewing of the moon becomes an excuse for poetry composition, musical performance, and philosophical discussion that can continue late into the night. Winter celebrations center around the New Year observances that mark the most important holiday in the Japanese calendar. These events require months of preparation, with every detail of ceremony, decoration, and entertainment planned to reflect both religious significance and political messaging. The distribution of gifts, the selection of entertainment, the composition of guest lists, all of these elements carry political weight that extends far beyond their apparent ceremonial function. At night, the castle grows even quieter. Lanterns burn low in the hallways, their flickering light creating moving shadows that dance across the walls. The sound of footsteps softens as courtiers retire to their rooms, each following paths through the complex that reflect their rank and the protocols governing their movement after dark. The gardens appear as dark silhouettes against the sky, their carefully shaped forms becoming mysterious landscapes where imagination can transform familiar spaces into scenes from classical poetry. The night hours bring their own routines and responsibilities. Guards patrol in patterns that have been refined over generations, their soft-soled shoes making no sound on the wooden walkways. In the quarters reserved for the highest-ranking officials, oil lamps burn as important correspondence is drafted and reviewed. The quiet hours after midnight become precious time for reflection, for reading classical texts, for composing poetry that might never be shared, but serves to maintain connection with cultural traditions that give meaning to otherwise circumscribed lives. Somewhere deep within the inner quarters, the shogun settles into his own chambers, shielded from both the concerns of the city and the restless ambitions of those who serve him. His private apartments represent the ultimate expression of Japanese aesthetic principles, with rooms that can be reconfigured through the movement of sliding screens, creating spaces that adapt to different seasons, moods, and ceremonial requirements. The shogun's evening routine includes consultations with his most trusted advisors, review of reports from throughout the realm, and private moments of contemplation that allow him to process the weight of absolute authority. His sleeping chamber is positioned at the exact center of the castle complex, surrounded by multiple layers of security, both visible and hidden. Even in sleep, he remains the focal point around which the entire structure of government revolves. The isolation of absolute power creates its own burdens. The shogun must make decisions that affect millions of people while remaining personally removed from the consequences of those choices. His human connections are limited to those who serve his political needs, making genuine friendship nearly impossible. The elaborate protocols that surround his every moment, designed to emphasize his elevated status, also create barriers that separate him from authentic human experience. Visitors who leave the court often describe the experience as dreamlike, a passage through a world that operates according to different principles than those governing ordinary life. Time inside seems to move at a different pace, marked not by the urgency of commerce or the demands of survival, but by the rhythms of ceremony and the subtle evolution of political relationships. There is no room for impulsiveness or open emotion. The culture of the court values restraint above all else, creating an environment where self-control becomes the highest virtue and spontaneity a dangerous luxury. And yet, within these boundaries, life continues day after day. Decisions made in these rooms ripple outward, affecting provinces, villages, and people who may never set foot inside the castle walls. Trade policies discussed in hushed conversations between courtiers determine the prosperity of distant merchants. Military deployments planned in strategy sessions impact the lives of farmers who will never see a samurai. Marriage alliances negotiated through careful diplomatic exchanges shape the futures of children not yet born. The power exercised within these walls is both absolute and fragile. It depends on the continued acceptance of millions of subjects who never directly experience its exercise, but whose cooperation makes possible the entire elaborate structure of Tokugawa rule. The castle serves as both the symbol and the instrument of this power. Its very perfection, a statement of permanence that must constantly be maintained against the forces of change and decay. As we step away from this world, let us pause for a final moment. Let the quiet of these polished halls linger in your imagination. Picture the empty corridors where footsteps echo despite every effort to muffle sound, where the faint smell of incense still hangs in the air hours after the morning ceremonies have concluded. Listen for the distant sounds of the city outside, muted and far away, yet somehow managing to penetrate even the thick walls and elaborate protocols that separate this realm from the world beyond. The contrast is striking and deliberate. Inside the castle, every element has been refined to create an impression of timeless perfection. Outside, the city of Edo pulses with the energy of change, growth, and adaptation. The merchants and artisans, the laborers and entertainers who make up the bulk of the population, live lives that would be incomprehensible to the courtiers who govern them. Just as the elaborate rituals of court life remain mysterious to those who observe the castle only from a distance. Now let us slowly return from the past to the present. Our journey through feudal Japan has shown us the struggles of foot soldiers, the sacrifices of loyal retainers, the mysteries of ancient tombs, and the quiet discipline of life at the Shogun's court. Each of these worlds operated according to its own logic, its own values, its own understanding of honor and duty. But our exploration is far from complete. Beyond the castle walls, beyond the reach of the Shogun's direct authority, other worlds await our attention. In the shadows of the great cities, in communities that exist at the margins of official recognition, we will discover lives shaped by different pressures and guided by different dreams. The story of Japan includes not only those who wielded power, but those who lived beneath its weight, who found ways to create meaning and beauty despite circumstances that might seem to offer little opportunity for either. What secrets do these hidden communities hold? What forms of resistance and adaptation developed in spaces that official history rarely records? Our next journey will take us into these overlooked corners of the past, where we may discover that the most interesting stories are often those that were never meant to be told. And now, our quiet walk through history draws to a close. We've wandered through the muddy camps of samurai foot soldiers, where the earth beneath their feet was churned into thick, clinging paste by countless boots and hooves. The air there was heavy with the scent of wet leather and iron, mixed with the wood smoke from cooking fires that never seemed to burn quite hot enough. We stood beneath falling snow with the 47 Ronin, watching as each delicate flake settled on their weathered faces, melting instantly against skin that had grown hard from months of patient waiting. The silence around them was not empty, but full of purpose, heavy with the weight of honor that pressed down on their shoulders like invisible armor. We drifted past the mossy edges of Emperor Nintoku's silent tomb, where centuries of rain had painted the ancient stones in shades of deep green and silver. The moss there grows in patterns that seem almost deliberate, as if the earth itself is slowly reclaiming the monument with artistic intent. Each step around that sacred mound felt like walking through a living museum, where time moves differently and the present seems to dissolve into something far more ancient and mysterious. And we moved softly through the polished corridors of the Shogun's court, where every gesture carried meaning and every pause was deliberate. The floors there gleamed like dark mirrors, reflecting not just the careful movements of courtiers, but the accumulated weight of centuries of tradition. In those halls, a single misplaced word could shift the balance of power, and silence often spoke louder than any proclamation. Tonight, we didn't chase battles or grand victories. We didn't follow the familiar narratives of conquest and glory that fill so many history books. Instead, we simply paused to notice the slower details, the daily rhythms that actually shaped these lives. We listened for the sounds that rarely make it into the chronicles, the scrape of a wooden spoon against a clay bowl, the soft shuffle of sandaled feet on tatami mats, the distant sound of water dripping from temple eaves after a summer storm. We paid attention to the waiting. So much of samurai life was spent in preparation, in the spaces between action. Hours spent maintaining weapons that might never be drawn in anger. Days of travel through landscapes that stretched endlessly toward uncertain destinations. Months of political maneuvering where the wrong alliance could mean exile or death. This waiting was not passive but active, a constant state of readiness that required its own kind of courage. We noticed the footsteps, not just the thunderous charge of cavalry or the measured march of armies, but the quiet steps of individuals moving through their daily lives. The hesitant approach of a messenger bearing unwelcome news. The confident stride of a lord entering his own domain. The careful, silent movement of a spy navigating unfamiliar territory. Each footstep tells a story about the person making it, about their confidence or fear, their purpose or confusion. And we observed the silence between decisions. In a world where choices could determine not just personal fate, but the destiny of entire clans, the moments before commitment held enormous weight. We glimpsed leaders sitting alone in their chambers, surrounded by flickering candlelight, weighing options that all seemed to lead toward some form of loss. These silences were not empty, but full of potential, pregnant with possibilities that would soon collapse into irreversible action. It's easy to imagine the samurai as figures of poetry and precision, frozen in perfect poses on painted screens. The artistic representations that survive from their era show them as idealized warriors, their faces calm and determined, their postures embodying perfect balance between power and restraint. These images have shaped our understanding of what it meant to be samurai, creating a vision of men who existed in a state of perpetual readiness, always poised on the edge of elegant violence. But as we saw tonight, their world was also filled with hunger. Real gnawing hunger that came from long campaigns where supply lines failed and armies had to live off whatever they could forage from the land. Hunger that struck not just the common soldiers, but the commanders as well, creating a shared misery that sometimes forged unexpected bonds between men of different stations. The elegant tea ceremonies and refined court meals that we associate with this era were rare luxuries, islands of plenty in an ocean of scarcity. Their world knew exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness that comes from sleeping on hard ground for months at a time, from wearing heavy armor under the relentless summer sun, from the constant vigilance required to survive in a society where political allegiances shifted like sand. This exhaustion wasn't just physical, but mental and spiritual, the accumulated weight of living always on guard, always ready for betrayal or attack. They experienced quiet fear, not the dramatic terror of charging into battle, but the subtle, persistent anxiety of never knowing which conversation might be your last, which ally might decide you've become more valuable as an enemy. Fear of disappointing their lords, of failing to live up to the impossible standards of Bushido, of leaving their families defenseless in a world that showed little mercy to the weak. This fear was rarely acknowledged openly, but it shaped every decision, every relationship, every moment of their lives. And they knew moments of quiet pride that often went unrecognized. The satisfaction of a duty performed perfectly, even when no one was watching. The pride of maintaining honor in circumstances where compromise would have been easier and more profitable. The deep contentment that came from knowing they had lived according to their principles, even when those principles demanded terrible sacrifices. These moments of pride are often solitary, experienced in silence, treasured privately, because public acknowledgement might have seemed like boasting. The smell of wet armor drying by a smoky fire becomes vivid when you imagine it fully. The metal, already heavy with the accumulated sweat and fear of its wearer, grows heavier still when soaked with rain or river water. When finally removed and set near the flames, it releases a complex mixture of scents: the metallic tongue of iron, the organic smell of leather and silk linings, the acrid smoke from wood that's still slightly green. The steam that rises carries with it the essence of countless miles traveled, countless dangers faced, countless nights spent sleeping in places far from home. The slow sweep of a caretaker's broom at the foot of an ancient tomb creates its own meditation. Each stroke removes not just leaves and debris, but adds another layer to a ritual that has been performed for centuries. The broom itself might be made from the same materials as those used by caretakers generations ago, creating an unbroken chain of service that connects the present moment to the era when the tomb was first sealed. The rhythm of the sweeping becomes a kind of prayer, a way of honoring the dead through simple, repetitive action. The subtle rustle of silk sleeves in a candlelit audience chamber speaks to worlds within worlds. Each rustle represents not just movement, but communication, a complex language of gesture and positioning that could convey respect, defiance, submission, or threat. The silk itself tells stories. Its origin, its cost, the hands that wove it, the merchants who transported it, the artisans who transformed it into garments worthy of court. In the flickering candlelight, these sleeves become animated, taking on lives of their own as they catch and release the dancing flames. These are the real textures of a long-forgotten past, not the broad strokes of political history or the dramatic moments of famous battles, but the accumulated weight of daily experience. The texture of rough hemp cloth against skin, sensitized by years of wearing silk. The feeling of wooden floors beneath bare feet, polished smooth by countless generations of walkers. The weight of a sword at one side, so familiar that its absence would feel like missing a limb. The taste of tea, prepared according to ancient ritual, where every movement has been refined over centuries to achieve perfect harmony between host and guest. The sound of rain on paper screens, creating a natural music that changes with the intensity of the storm. The sight of cherry blossoms falling like snow, each petal a reminder of the beautiful impermanence that shaped the samurai worldview. These textures accumulate into something larger than their individual parts. They create an atmosphere, a sense of what it might have actually felt like to live in that time and place. They remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a collection of experiences. Each one is real and immediate to those who lived it, as our own experiences are to us today. So as you settle deeper now into stillness, let your thoughts drift like distant footsteps fading down a palace corridor. Imagine those footsteps belonging to someone whose story we'll never know completely, someone who lived and loved and struggled and died in a world that feels both foreign and familiar. Their footsteps echo through time, growing fainter but never completely disappearing, adding their rhythm to the vast symphony of human experience. The palace corridor stretches endlessly in your imagination, its polished floors reflecting not light, but memory. The footsteps might belong to a young samurai making his way to his first audience with his lord, his heart pounding with nervousness and ambition. Or perhaps they belong to an aging retainer, walking the same path for the 1000th time, his steps slower now, but still steady, still purposeful. Maybe they're the quick, light steps of a servant carrying an urgent message, or the measured pace of a diplomat, carefully considering each word of a delicate negotiation. No need to remember every name or every title. The specific details matter less than the feeling, the sense of connection across centuries to people who face the same fundamental questions that we face today. How do we live with honor? How do we balance duty to others with our own needs and desires? How do we find meaning in a world that often seems chaotic and unfair? How do we face death with dignity when our time comes? These questions had no easy answers then, and they have no easy answers now. Perhaps there's comfort in knowing that others have wrestled with them before us, that the human condition has always included this struggle to understand our place in the larger story of existence. The samurai, for all their cultural specificity, were asking the same questions that keep us awake at night, searching for the same sense of purpose that drives us forward despite uncertainty and fear. Let the echoes of this history become soft background noise, blending with the night air. The sounds of that distant world, the clash of steel, the whisper of silk, the scratch of brushes writing poetry on paper, the gentle splash of water in stone basins, all of these fade into a comfortable murmur, like a lullaby sung in a language you don't quite understand, but somehow find deeply soothing. The night air itself becomes part of the story, carrying with it the same elements that once filled the lungs of samurai warriors and court ladies, of merchants and monks and farmers. The oxygen you breathe now once sustained people whose names are lost to history, but whose lives were just as complex and meaningful as your own. This continuity of breath, of the basic elements that sustain life, creates a connection, transcends the boundaries of time and culture. Thank you for joining me for this slow journey. In a world that often demands speed and efficiency, there's something almost revolutionary about choosing to move slowly, to pay attention to details that might seem insignificant, to value the spaces between events as much as the events themselves. This kind of attention is its own form of meditation, a way of honoring both the past and the present by refusing to let either slip by unnoticed. The journey we've taken together tonight is not just through Japanese history, but through the landscape of human experience itself. We've explored the universal, themes that connect us to people separated from us by centuries and continents, the search for meaning, the struggle with mortality, the desire to live with honor and dignity, the challenge of balancing individual needs with collective responsibilities. Wherever you are and whatever time it may be, I hope sleep comes easily tonight. May your dreams be filled not with the dramatic battles of history books, but with the quieter moments we've explored together, the gentle fall of snow, the rustle of leaves around ancient tombs, the soft sound of footsteps on polished floors. These peaceful images can serve as anchors, grounding you in a sense of connection to the vast sweep of human experience, while allowing your mind to rest. I hope that the past feels just a little closer and a little quieter tonight. Closer because we've touched it through imagination and empathy, recognizing our shared humanity with people who lived in very different circumstances, but faced many of the same fundamental challenges. Quieter because we've moved beyond the noise of conquest and politics to find the stillness that exists at the heart of all human experience. The calm center that people in every era have sought when the world around them seemed too chaotic to comprehend. This closeness and quietness are gifts that history can offer when approached with patience and respect. The past is not a foreign country, but a different room in the same house, separated from us by walls that are thinner than we often imagine. Through careful attention and gentle imagination, we can sometimes hear the voices of those who came before us, not as distant echoes, but as conversations that are still somehow ongoing. The quietness we've found together is not the silence of death, but the peace of understanding. It's the calm that comes from recognizing patterns that persist across time, from seeing how individual human stories connect to create the larger narrative of our species. This understanding doesn't solve all mysteries or answer all questions, but it provides a kind of comfort, a sense that we are part of something larger and more enduring than our individual lives. We'll meet again soon for another story from long ago. There are countless other journeys waiting to be taken, other cultures and eras that can teach us about the depth and complexity of human experience. Each story offers its own textures and rhythms, its own insights into what it means to be human in a world that is both beautiful and terrible, both meaningful and mysterious. Until then, rest well and dream softly. Let your sleep be filled with the gentle images we've shared tonight, and may you wake tomorrow with a renewed sense of connection to the great river of human experience that flows through every generation. The samurai and their world are gone, but the questions they faced and the grace with which they faced them remain as relevant and inspiring as ever. But before we part ways completely, let me leave you with this thought. Somewhere in the mountains of Japan, morning mist is beginning to rise from valleys where other stories wait to be told. Stories of mountain mystics who spent decades in solitude, seeking enlightenment through practices so austere they seem impossible to modern minds. Stories of craftsmen whose dedication to their art transformed simple materials into objects of transcendent beauty. Stories of women who wielded power from behind screens, shaping the course of history through intelligence and will rather than sword and armor. These stories call to us across the centuries, whispering of experiences so different from our own, yet fundamentally connected to the same human longings for meaning, beauty, and transcendence that drive us still.